his and a pleasure to work with, and it became pretty clear early on that that would be a huge, colossal mistake to kill off Jesse. There is an aspect of Jesse's character that Vince Gilligan does regret though, but we'll get to that a little later. Tier 4. Walter White takes on characteristics of his victims. This is something a lot of people have picked up on, but still is an underrated aspect to Walter's character in my opinion. For some reason, every time he kills someone, he consciously or subconsciously takes on some characteristic of them, be it a mannerism or even simply a way of preparing and eating food, which is exactly what he does with his first victim, Crazy 8. Who, if you remember, didn't like the crust on his sandwiches, a habit which Walter later replicates. A more easily seen one is how he acts after killing Gus, trying to become more like him, a businessman that shares his aptitude for keeping his meth business separate from his real business, appearing as an unassuming civilian to the average person, a persona which he uses just like Gus did when Lydia visits him as he's working at the car wash. He also even starts to drive the same car as him after killing him. After killing Mike in Season 5, he also begins to get his drinks on the rocks like he did, when he previously asked for them neat. There might be even more examples, but these are just some of the more interesting ones I and others have picked up on as the series progressed. Walt's warning and Walt's wisdom. Who would have thought we'd see some lost media in this iceberg? Well, if you're familiar with these lost Breaking Bad Flash games, then I guess you might have seen it coming. Walt's Wisdom was the first interactive Flash game made to promote Season 1, and Walt's Warning was created for Season 2 in 2009. The games consist of videos of Bryan Cranston portraying Walt, calling the player where they could provide their information, such as name, location, and pictures, which sounds sketchy, believe me, I know. And hilariously enough though, there are videos which have been found, despite both the games being unplayable as of right now, of Walt burning photos of random people while in the RV. The second game goes even farther as you are now kidnapped in the RV and being interrogated by Walt.
Wake up. You know, my wife is pregnant with a baby we neither intended nor can afford. My 15-year-old son has cerebral palsy, and within 18 months, I will be dead. You have no idea the sacrifices I have made for this family. So don't imagine for a second that I wouldn't do everything within my power to stop you from screwing it all up. So much as breathe a word about what you saw here today. Have I made myself clear? You just can't take your eyes off that, can you? Huh? What a good look. What would you do even if you got a hold of it, huh? It's a prop. It shoots blanks. I borrowed it from our high school drama department. Or should I say, stole it.
Does your fiance know you're spending this much money?
Is it bad?
$1,000 a month on takeout!
I don't have time to cook.
Why is there $40 on a wine subscription?
No, I thought I canceled that. That was for my ex.
Just download Rocket Money. It shows all your expenses in one place, helps you cancel unused subscriptions, and even tries to get you refunds.
It does all that?
Yeah, and it can help you create a budget so you're not spending the $1,000 on takeout.
That actually would really help.
Do your finances a favor. Download Rocket Money today.
The games were lost after Flash was discontinued in 2020, and now only archived videos and footage exists. Bob Odenkirk heart attack. While filming for Better Call Saul Season 5 back in 2021, Bob Odenkirk, who plays Saul Goodman, had a health scare on set, suffering what he would later describe as a small heart attack. Even if it was small, having any heart attack is obviously terrifying. He collapsed on set in New Mexico on July 28, 2021, and was rushed to hospital, where where he luckily recovered and fairly quickly as well, returning to filming in September of that year. Hank survives. Here we have a crazy alternate ending skit that was performed by Dean Norris in collaboration with the YouTube channel Funny or Die, in which Hank comes back to life and crawls out of his grave in the desert.
Let me get the fuck out of here. Gomi, I'm gonna avenge your death and take out that neo-Nazi scum.
Toys R Us figures. Back in 2014, there was a slight controversy regarding the sale of these Breaking Bad action figures, which were available at Toys R Us, typically seen as a more kid-friendly toy store. Despite the box of the figures saying ages 15 plus, some parents were still outraged that they would sell these toys there, and thus started a petition to get them removed. You know, typical Karen activities. There was even a counter petition, one shouted out by Aaron Paul himself, which got 3 times as many signatures to bring the toys back. But by then it was basically already too late. Jesse plays Rage with light gun. So this is a really random detail, but in Season 4, Episode 7 of Breaking Bad, Jesse plays the video game Rage, a first-person shooter released in November 2010, which already, timeline-wise, doesn't really make sense, given this takes place sometime in 2009. But also, Jesse is playing the game with a light gun, like NES Duck Hunt style. Don't get me wrong though, I think this is pretty cool, and actually something that's easily replicable, at least according to Reddit. Mike was only going to appear in 1 episode. Yes, you heard that right. Among the list of other great characters who weren't going to stay for very long, we have Mike, who was only intended to fill in for Bob Odenkirk for 1 episode when he was unavailable for filming, so he wasn't even in the picture originally. And going from that to eventually becoming a side character, then main cast member is just crazy, eventually even becoming a fan favorite, and one of the main characters of the spin-off series Better Call Saul. It just goes to show that while Breaking Bad was a very meticulous, detail-oriented, and planned-out series, a lot of decisions were still spontaneous, but benefited the story greatly. Bryan Cranston was once a murder suspect. This really has nothing to do with Breaking Bad, but it is an interesting tidbit about Bryan Cranston's life, which he explained in an interview with Jimmy Fallon in 2016 on The Tonight Show, and was also a part of his memoir, A Life in Parts, written in 2016. He explains in the story that he and his brother got jobs as waiters at a Polynesian restaurant called the Hawaiian Inn in Daytona Beach, Florida, in the mid-1970s. Apparently, at this place, the chef there was so hated that the waiters would discuss how they would kill him, obviously joking in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. However, as it turns out, Peter Wong, the chef at the restaurant, had been murdered, and it just so happens that around the same time, Bryan and his brother had left the area, leading detectives to put out an APB on him and his brother. But before the cops could get to them, they eventually found additional suspects that seemed like more likely leads. A man was arrested and charged with the murder by the name of Billy Wayne Wattell, along with 2 other suspects, although he was also allegedly murdered while behind bars. Fring's back. This is a really cool Easter egg found in Better Call Saul's 2nd season, previewing the imminent return of one of TV's greatest villains, which would in fact occur in episode 2 of season 3. The Easter egg is found in the episode titles of season 2. By rearranging the first letters of each episode, you can spell out the words Fring's back. Really cool stuff, and not the first time there was some sort of double meaning or hidden Easter egg within Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul episode titles. 2008 recession impact on story. An underappreciated and less talked about element that no doubt had an effect on the story was the Great Financial Crisis, a huge worldwide financial meltdown, which occurred around the time of the 1st season, back in late 2007 and 2008. The unemployment rate shot up, home prices collapsed, stocks crashed, people couldn't get jobs, and it's evident to see the effects on the story, as Walt is the only breadwinner for his family when the show begins, having to work 2 jobs as both a high school chemistry teacher and at a car wash just to support his family. There are many people who reference it, especially Walt, directly throughout the show. People talking about in this economy and, things of that nature. I mean, it's a common quip, a common thing people say even nowadays, but still in this show, especially in the early seasons, it really captures the zeitgeist of that late 2000s era. A time of basically peak financial insecurity and uncertainty. Mandela effects. Since Breaking Bad is sort of a newer series, I mean, not that new, but relatively speaking in the history of television, there aren't as many cases of the Mandela effect that have been reported as far as I can tell. If you want to hear about some of the more interesting cases though, just make sure to check out my Mandela effect iceberg after this one. However, there are a few which I did find on Reddit. The biggest one being the often misquoted Jesse line, "Yeah, science, bitch," which was never actually said in the show. It's actually a mixture of two different classic lines from Jesse. "Yeah, Mr. White, yeah, science," and "yeah, magnets." Another one can be found in season 4, when Walt goes to Gus's house to kill him. Who gives him a call to stop him? If you said Mike, that would be incorrect, even though for some reason I also thought that it was Mike. In reality, it was Tyrus. It wasn't even Gus.
Go home, Walter.
Hey guys, welcome to the neighborhood.
Definitely getting new countertops. But we need shades right now.
Buy now, pay over time. Affirm.
A hot and steamy au jus is the king of dips. It enhances the flavor of everything. Roast beef, onions, cheese. I would dip everything in au jus if I could. Everything. Firefighter approved. And if you want some savings, order on the app.
Another really interesting misquote that a lot of people say is, "Jesse, we need to cook," which Walt never says directly, although he does just say "we need to cook" quite a few times, just never with the Jesse in front of it. Sort of a Luke, I am your father situation. What was on Jesse's letter? At the end of El Camino, while being dropped off in Alaska, Jesse gives a final letter to Ed the Disappearer, presumably to give to Brock, but we never get to see the contents of the letter. Some even joked that Brock would never see it anyway as it had no stamp. But seriously, what did he say to him? Did he tell him the truth behind his mother's death? Where or why he left? We may never truly know. But what's interesting is that in an interview, Aaron Paul said that the letter was in the script originally before it was cut, presumably being read aloud by him. But the contents will remain a mystery, unless Vince gives the go-ahead for someone to reveal it. 60-second element. Everything in Breaking Bad has significance. We know this by now. Be it the colors, names of episodes, or even the number of episodes, 62 for the entire series, with 62 being a very important number on the periodic table of elements, samarium, an element used in various cancer treatments. Now, some might say this is looking way too deep into things. I mean, bravo Vince and all that, but with all the thought put into the series and its small, seemingly insignificant intricacies, I could actually see this being an intended Easter egg. Riverside, California. In another interview with series creator Vince Gilligan, he was asked about why the series was set in Albuquerque, New Mexico, rather than somewhere in California or Texas. He explains that his original concept had the story set in Riverside, California, a location fairly close to the Mexican border, but at the same time he apparently wasn't intending or thinking about incorporating a Mexican drug cartel aspect into it, thinking more in terms of a homegrown meth business. However, Sony asked him if setting the story in New Mexico would work, because they would get a large 25% tax rebate for the television production if they did it there, which he agreed to, and eventually grew to love the city and couldn't see it taking place anywhere else. Los Pollos Hermanos Real Restaurant. Los Pollos Hermanos is of course Gus Fring's fictional chicken restaurant in the series, but the set used was of a real restaurant, a Twister's branch in South Valley, New Mexico. Twister's being a New Mexican cuisine restaurant known for burritos and green chili cheeseburgers. And on January 20th, 2018, the same location to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the start of the series, for one day set up the location once again as Los Pollos Hermanos. Raisin Bran Crunch. Very random detail that someone noticed and posted to Reddit 11 years ago on the Breaking Bad subreddit, and of course it's related to Walt Jr.'s breakfast. In this image, we see Walt Jr. complaining that his mom got Raisin Bran instead of Raisin Bran Crunch back in Season 2. Later, in Season 5, we see Walt look over at the correct Raisin Bran Crunch. Bravo, Vince. Breaking Bad could have ended at Season 4. I believe this is actually a common misconception about the 4th season of the show. I couldn't find any interview where Vince Gilligan or anyone else directly stated this, but I guess it could be true that season 4 was set up as sort of a soft finale in case the series wasn't renewed for a final season. Even though it would have been very disappointing, many fans expressed that they find this ending better than the real one. That is still, of course, an unpopular opinion and one I disagree with, but it's easy to see why some people felt this way. I mean, Walt won. Everything went right for him. It was his rise before the fall. He killed Gus, won his family back, got Jesse to trust him again, had everything he ever wanted, really, only for the final season to take it all away. The reason this is even a thing that people say, though, is likely because the show was mostly unpopular for the first 3 seasons, until it came out on Netflix and became known as such an iconic and binge-worthy show. And season 4 had great ratings, which allowed one more season to be made. At least that's how the theory goes.
This holiday, she's not settling for anything less than the triple treat box from Pizza Hut, featuring pizza, breadsticks, and dessert, starting at $19.99.
It's a good deal, bro.
Get the holidays delivered with Pizza Hut.
Whatever your thing is, send it across town with Courier on Uber. Send and receive your things. Courier now on Uber.
Tier 5. Better Call Saul feet fetish scenes. A bit of a meme in the community, but seriously, it feels like there were a ton of Kim feet scenes in the show. Maybe this was Bob Odenkirk's idea, as he did for a time follow a foot fetish Instagram account. The more you know, I guess. Or, as others have suggested, maybe it was a Tarantino homage, as there are a few of those to be found in Breaking Bad. Fortnite collab. Fortnite is of course known for collabing with almost every known entertainment franchise out there. From anime to cartoons, movies, Marvel, DC, games like Resident Evil, Metal Gear, Halo, God of War, you get the idea. So it's no surprise that people have suggested that they should do a collaboration with one of the most popular TV shows ever made. It would no doubt be immensely popular. Now, I already know what you're thinking, but Source, this is a kid's game. Why would they have Breaking Bad skins? Good question. Well, apparently skins have ratings now. Yes, like age ratings, which I guess is how they've had other non-kid-friendly properties like Invincible. I mean, you can even play as Omni-Man in Fortnite. Kim is Wendy theory. Now we're getting to the really out there stuff. Insane theories, my favorite entries in this iceberg, and this is just one of many. This was an ongoing theory during the run of Better Call Saul, that somehow Kim would eventually turn into the meth addict Wendy seen in Breaking Bad. This likely came about for no other reason other than the fact that they're both blonde. I can think of nothing else. Oh, and also later on, hilariously enough, Gilligan even referenced this theory in a home media commentary, joking about the possibility of Kim actually being Wendy. There were plenty of theories going around at the time as to where Kim was during Breaking Bad, from her being killed off to going to prison, going into witness protection, working with Jimmy behind the scenes, or even working for Gus. The darkest of these possibilities will make an appearance later down the list. Payday 2 references. The Payday games pay homage to many great crime films and TV shows, and that is no exception with Breaking Bad and Payday 2, which they have many Easter eggs alluding to, and even a full heist day dedicated to it entitled Cook-Off, where the crew arrives to find the meth cooks killed, and have to cook it themselves while cops constantly storm the house and try to stop them. Many of the achievements for this heist reference the show, such as I'm the One Who Knocks, for cooking 3 bags of meth without a cop entering the house. Or Full Measure, in reference to Season 3, Episode 13, for securing 7 bags of meth without blowing up the lab. The achievement Captain Cook is unlocked for beating the heist on Mayhem difficulty. And for beating it on the hardest difficulty, on Death Sentence, you get Breaking Bad. There are some really cool Bane lines too when you finish the heist that references the show.
You guys can cook. Which one of you is Heisenberg? Hector wants to know.
Jane's mural. You might notice in the background of Jane's apartment in Season 2 that she has a peculiar mural painted on the wall behind her bed. It looks like nothing crazy at first glance, but take a closer look and you'll find some chilling imagery and interesting foreshadowing. First, you might notice in the top right corner, the pink bear found in Walter's pool after the Wayfarer 515 disaster. As pointed out in this Reddit post, the alarm clock in the bottom right displays the time of night, 3 a.m., in which Jane dies, The planet Saturn can also be seen on the left side, with the day of the week, Saturday, deriving from that name, giving the day of Saturday, which happened to be on March 7th, 2009 at 3 a.m., her exact date and time of death. The girl in the middle is also clearly a reflection of Jane, with her black hair being whisked away into the void, signifying her death, while she is covered in a black goo, possibly meant to represent black tar heroin, the very drug and addiction that caused her demise. Eye of God theory. Going back to the teddy bear a little bit, we have a Breaking Bad theory known as the Eye of God, dating back 12 years ago, and opposed to r/fan theories from a now deleted user. They write, quote, "Okay, so I power watched the first 4 seasons all last week. I noticed around season 2, I think, that there might be an all-watching eye theme. When the eyeball is floating around in the water, it's from the plane crash that Walter realizes he had a role in, is a phenomenon in the Fly episode, that he had no control over it, the plane crash, and thus the eye is not in anyone's possession. When Walter gets a hold of the eye, he begins to take more control over situations. When Skylar looks at the eye, she has Lavelle Crawford, who IMO is vastly underused as he is fucking hilarious, and that other guy, can't remember his name right now, go to Beneke's house and force him to pay the IRS. When Gus kills Don Eladio, he takes his necklace, which looks like it has an eye pendant. Then Gus dodges the bomb Walter planted for him in his car. Gus then gives the necklace to Tio, the gangster in the wheelchair with the bell, and as we all know, there is a shot of the necklace in his room before he kills Gus and himself. Also, I was wondering if anyone else had any theories on how the teddy bear, with one that was shown in color while everything else was in black and white, had anything to do with Gus's death. If anyone has any links to similar theories, I'd love to read them. I did search for them, but couldn't find anything yet. An interesting theory or interpretation for sure. Also a fascinating thing to input is that Thomas Schnauz, one of the writers, said in 2020 that he remembered a scene in which Walt actually threw away the eyeball in season 4, which may have been cut from the story. Although after season 4 episode 1, the eyeball never appears again. Jesse's teeth. Remember when I said that Vince Gilligan only had one regret about Jesse's character? Well, this is it. It was Jesse's teeth. This is because he believes it was not an accurate portrayal of a meth addict. For Jesse to have the perfect, straight, healthy white teeth that Aaron Paul has, he thinks this might have been a mistake, and regrets not showing the harsher realities of chronic drug use in the form of tooth decay. Also, he gets beaten up and his face smashed in quite a few times, and yet still has all his perfect teeth. However, it likely would have been a more difficult and expensive undertaking to deal with having prosthetics for every scene, and just generally, I think audiences prefer it this way, even if it is less realistic. Network rejections. I'm sure all these networks that turned down Breaking Bad are still kicking themselves to this day, but in their defense, on paper, as an outline, it sounds interesting for sure, but not something you could predict would become the best series of all time, surely. You know, hindsight is 20/20 and all that. HBO, Showtime, and FX all passed on it, not knowing what it would become. Makes you wonder how different the story direction would be, though, on a network like HBO, where you have full-length, hour-long episodes and almost no restrictions on violence, language, or nudity, unlike a standard television network like AMC. Kevin Cordasco. This is a rather sad entry, as Kevin Cordasco was a 16-year-old fan of Breaking Bad who was suffering from neuroblastoma, a form of nerve cell cancer. He passed away on March 11th, 2013, with episode 9 of season 5, Blood Money, being dedicated to him. Before he passed, though, he was visited by the cast and crew, and was even given the prop of Tortuga's severed head. Gilligan also credits him with coming up with the idea of having Gretchen and Elliot reintroduced in the finale, which was a great call in my opinion, and it's not often that a fan's input has a direct impact on the story of a series. The hat was Bryan Cranston's idea. While the iconic Heisenberg hat today is seen as a way of Walt transforming into his alter ego, it didn't start out that way. In fact, it, innocuously enough, was introduced into the story by Cranston himself, complaining about his head getting sunburned while he was bald, and was permitted to wear it in certain scenes, and it eventually stuck and became an iconic part of his Heisenberg persona. The real Saul Goodman. So you know there was a real Walter White, but did you know there was a real Saul Goodman? In a similar format to their immensely popular video on the real Walter White, Vice again made one on the real Saul Goodman. real name Howard Greenberg, a fast-talking and admittedly eccentric defense attorney from New York, who is equally effective as he is outlandish and unconventional in his methods, and also has represented some high-profile criminals and downright detestable individuals that most wouldn't give a second chance. Check out the Vice video if you want to see more.
With Chevy Equinox EV, you and your money can go further in America's most affordable EV with over 315 miles of range. Starting around $34,995. Go EV without changing a thing. Chevrolet, together let's drive.
Próximo punto retraso de pago. Acabarás en la silla de rueda, lo sabe. ¿Qué hicieron con esos cadáveres? Así no.
Huell in the safe house. Back during season 5, Huell is sent to a secret DEA safe house for his protection away from Heisenberg. At least that's what they tell him in order to trick him into revealing the location of Walt's hidden desert money, which he doesn't actually do, but he does tell them they use a rented van, which is enough information to eventually fool Walt into revealing the location of his money. Hank and Gomez actually leave to track down Walt while Huell stays in the safe house. Hilariously enough, Huell is never seen again, leaving many to assume he is still waiting there to this day, as of course both Gomez and Hank die at the hands of Jack and his gang in the desert. Lalo and Howard are in Breaking Bad. And no, that's not clickbait. Well, kind of. Actually, yeah, it is. However, no one could have guessed the fate of Howard and Lalo would eventually be that they would be buried beneath Gus's mega lab. Meaning they're technically still there during the events of Breaking Bad, and many fans think, or come up with the reason for the fly being in the lab, is because of their rotting corpses beneath them. Dream theory. A classic. Almost every piece of media has gotten the "it was just a dream" theory at one point or another. And initially it seems quite ridiculous in the case of Breaking Bad, but hold on, I agree with you. But also there might be a bit more to this than you actually think. The whole series wasn't a dream or anything. No, this theory posits that at the beginning of the finale episode, when Walt is stuck in his car during a snowstorm, that is actually where he dies, and the rest of the episode after this is some sort of fantasy, his final thoughts before passing on, what he wanted to do, wrapping things up with his family, rescuing Jesse, getting revenge for Hank, and dying in the place where he felt most alive, in a meth lab. In reality, he either freezes to death or dies of his condition while in his car, unable to escape, and simply retreats into a fantasy before passing away. Saul cameo in Attack on Titan. I literally remember reading this chapter, 124 of Attack on Titan, right when it dropped, and I was like, holy shit, is that Saul? And yes, it actually is. Not only that, but they even adapted this little Easter egg into the anime counterpart, which is just so cool. Shout out to Isayama for that. He, as you might have guessed, happens to be a huge fan of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, as he has stated in multiple interviews and blog posts. There are also other TV character references in the form of Titans in Attack on Titan, such as in Chapter 96, where you can see what looks to be Varys, Marjorie Tyrell, Arya Stark, and even Tyrion all as Titans. Tier 6. Walt isn't dead theory. Opposite from the dream theory, we have one of the more out there ones that was thankfully finally put to rest in El Camino, which confirmed Walter White's death. Nevertheless, we have the Walt isn't actually dead theory, which I guess stemmed from the fact that there is no hard confirmation that he is dead in Breaking Bad. Like, it's never stated out loud like it is in El Camino, even though we literally watch it happen in real time, as he falls over and dies of his gunshot wound as Baby Blue plays in the background. Some thought he might have somehow survived this. How or why is truly beyond me. Maybe they thought the police response team and medics could have saved him before he bled out. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Dead theory anyway. JPI. JPI is a graffiti signature that can be found at multiple points throughout Breaking Bad as well as Better Call Saul. Here it can be seen in Season 4, Episode 7 of Breaking Bad, and Episode 3 of Season 1 of Better Call Saul. But what does it mean? Some theorize that since it appears in Jesse's house, that it stands for Jesse Pinkman and is possibly his graffiti tag, giving us an early hint to his presence in Better Call Saul, but actually according to this commenter on Reddit, it might be related to one of the set painters, who had a ski company called JPI, or Just Point It, and was, I guess, giving himself free advertisement. Skylar's side. No, this is not a creepypasta. This was one of the other possible endings that we skipped over earlier, and possibly the darkest one, in which Skylar kills herself. According to Vince Gilligan, originally Walt and Skylar were going to be in a motel, and Walt was going to walk into the bathroom to discover that Skylar had slit her wrist. Incredibly dark stuff, even for a show with rather dark subject matter. But strangely enough, not even close to the darkest thing that Vince Gilligan and the crew came up with. That will come later. $50 bill. So this one is a little weird because during the Crystal Blue Persuasion montage, possibly the best one in the entire series, a bag with money can be seen briefly, which has a peculiar $50 bill that some believe has Vince Gilligan's face on it, except it doesn't really look like him, does it? But it's also clearly not a normal $50 bill. I mean, just look at the regular one above it. Likely it's just some generic prop money, but yeah, no Easter egg or anything like that. Auctioned items and props. There are a bunch of items, props, and pieces of memorabilia from both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul which were auctioned off, including some of which that sold for relatively low prices considering how popular the series now is, such as Walter's underwear from the pilot for just under $10,000, or Tuco's grill for $2,500, Hector's bell for $12,500, Walter's personal Walt Whitman book for $9,200, or the pink teddy bear for only $4,300. They even auctioned off several of the cars as well. Hector Salamanca was originally supposed to be the main antagonist of the third season. This is pretty wild, so I guess Hector was going to play a much bigger role in the third season, taking Tuco's place as the main antagonist before Gus was even an idea, and before they had decided to kill off Tuco in season 2. I couldn't really find much information firsthand on this, only other people reporting on it, so take this with a grain of salt, but it definitely would have been interesting, given Hector, can't talk or really move at all, and only communicates via his bell. Although we did get to see Mark Margolis give a great performance as a slightly younger Hector Salamanca before he became disabled in Better Call Saul seasons 2 and 3. Bryan Cranston played 2 characters in Breaking Bad. Yeah, get your Heisenberg jokes in now. That's probably what you expected me to say, right? But he actually did have a short cameo as a guy at one of Jesse's parties in Season 4, Episode 8, 38 Snub. And when you watch the short scene with that in mind, it becomes kind of obvious when this dude pops into frame. Red key fob. I don't really understand if this was meant as an Easter egg or a coincidence or what, but the same key fob that Walt uses to activate the M60 and kill Jack and his gang in the finale is the same one that Jimmy uses for his car in Season 1, Episode 1 of Better Call Saul, as we see him place it inside Chuck's mailbox. Brendan Fair, CR6. Okay, so get ready because this one is quite a rabbit hole, and also again related to a case of lost media. The actor Brendan Fair, known for quite a few different television roles, also played a small part in Better Call Saul as the Air Force Captain Bauer, who falls victim to Jimmy's scheme to gain access to the airbase. Before the Canadian actor would end up landing more prominent TV roles, he was a part of an early project, a now lost internet-based show made in 1997 called CR6, which would become a lost media rabbit hole worthy of its own video, with the show becoming a disaster, all the episodes being lost, and the creator fleeing to Chile before being found dead in his apartment under mysterious circumstances. Brendan Fair was likely a cast member, although since the show is lost, information about the project is limited, and the only source of his involvement in the show are edit revisions to his Wikipedia page.
How many subscriptions do you pay for?
It's a good question. Probably only like 3.
He's paying $257 on subscriptions he didn't even know about.
That can't be right, man. For real?
No, it's true. I thought I was only paying for Netflix and Spotify. Let's just say I'm in the doghouse with my girlfriend. Do yourself a favor and just download Rocket Money.
What's that?
It's an app that helps you find and cancel subscriptions. You download it and it opens up a list of subscriptions you're paying for and helps you just cancel them out.
$234? We've been paying for 2 Netflix accounts? I thought I canceled that last year.
Glad I'm not the only one.
Breaking Bad themed restaurants. Not just the one-day Los Pollos Hermanos Twisters conversion. No, I mean, all over the world there are many full-on Breaking Bad themed restaurants. And while obviously not licensed or official, are still really cool nonetheless. Thanks to Reddit, here's a few great ones. Hyzen Meat and Greet found in Iraq, complete with a blue meth burger, which I have to say looks disgusting, but it's cool that it exists. Heisenberger in Argentina, classic. And even Let's Cook Heisenberger, found in Lithuania. And look at these cute-ass burgers. I Am the Danger, Jesse Cheese, Heisenberger, Los Pollo, one singular, I guess, A La Parrilla, grilled chicken, I guess, and then Veggie Magic, whatever this is supposed to be. I give it a 1 out of 10 for no Walt Jr. breakfast food. Crazy 8's dog. Another situation in which we don't get resolution on a character and they're just left somewhere. This time it's Crazy 8's dog, who he left behind when he went to meet with Jesse and Emilio in the desert. And of course never returned, leaving his dog, which may have starved to death. Whoops. Crazy 8 was a DEA informant though, so as soon as he went missing, I'm sure the cops paid his place a visit and saved the dog. Him on the other hand, not so much. Jack Parsons, Fulminated Mercury, Inspiration. Okay, now we're really getting into the crazy stuff. So, Jack Parsons was an American chemist and rocket engineer, responsible for inventing the first ever rocket engine, as well as being generally instrumental in the development of several American institutions, such as JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Aerojet Engineering Corporation. One of the things he's most well known for, though, is his tragic death. On June 17, 1952, a terrible accident occurred while he was making explosives for a film set in his home laboratory. He had been mixing fulminate of mercury in a coffee mug when he accidentally dropped it on the floor, setting off a gigantic chemical reaction and explosion due to the other surrounding chemicals. The explosion was catastrophic, destroying the entire lower part of the building, severing Parsons' right arm entirely, breaking his left arm and both his legs, as well as leaving a massive hole in the right side of his face. Surprisingly, he was fully conscious and survived the initial explosion, but was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Some believe this dramatic chemistry accident might have been the inspiration behind Walter's use of fulminated mercury in Season 1, Episode 6's Crazy Handful of Nothing. Of course, Walt only uses a small amount, and the explosion is still huge, but they all end up surviving. The truly horrifying thing is that likely if Walt was able to actually create such an explosion with the use of mercury fulminate, the mercury released into the air as a result of the explosion would be even more dangerous, slowly killing everyone in the room over the course of a few very excruciating days as they die of mercury poisoning. Food for thought. Gus was working for the CIA theory. Courtesy of r/Breaking Bad, here we have this. Theory. Fring was affiliated with the CIA. Quote, Giancarlo Esposito and Vince Gilligan both said that Fring's past is supposed to remain a mystery, and there is no official canon. But I think I have come up with a plausible theory on Fring's past. He's involved with the CIA. Not a CIA agent exactly, but a Chilean citizen who had an ongoing relationship with the CIA. Here's what we know about Fring. He's originally from Chile. There are no records of him existing there. When Fring lived in Chile, he was at least somewhat wealthy, as he was able to help his partner get off the streets and go to university. When he and his partner tried to do business with Don Eladio, they were not yet big players in the narco world. Don Eladio says he didn't kill Fring because I know who you are. So what does that tell us? It tells us that Fring is someone that the head of a drug cartel refuses to kill. Well, there aren't many people who are off limits to a cartel kingpin. They kill their rivals, they kill politicians. There has to be a really good reason that Eladio didn't see fit to kill Fring, and it wasn't because he thought Fring could make him more money, because if that was what he wanted, he would have taken Fring's offer. Now, some history. Augusto Pinochet rose to power with US help, overthrowing Allende, a democratically elected socialist. Chile was one of many countries in which the US worked to undermine communist and socialist governments. So who is Fring in all this? Probably a powerful player in Chile who helps Pinochet rise to power. Why he left Chile is anyone's guess, but one possibility is that Fring maintained his relationship with the CIA. And once the US could no longer be seen to back Pinochet because of all the human rights abuses and extrajudicial killings under his dictatorship, Fring was sent to Mexico by the CIA with a mission to infiltrate and influence this cartel. In the real world, the CIA has allied with drug cartels, usually with the goal of taking down another cartel which is seen as the greater danger. This could also explain how Fring was able to legally immigrate to the US, despite a lack of records that would usually result in denial of citizenship. Was Fring still working with the CIA when he established his meth empire? Probably not. However, I can still see a scenario in which that is possible. The war on drugs is unwinnable, but the US government has an interest in minimizing drug-related violence on US soil. The cartel killed with extreme and indiscriminate violence, while Fring dealt with his enemies with quiet precision. So what if the CIA knew about Fring's meth empire, but tolerated it because it was better for the US government's image to simply have a meth epidemic than to constantly have headline-grabbing violence in the news? Addendum. It would also have been in the CIA's interest for the cartel to sell methamphetamine rather than move Colombian cocaine. The flashback when Gus meets Don Eladio almost definitely happens around the time Pablo Escobar was at the height of his power in Colombia. The US relied on Colombia as a steadfast ally in South America that would not fall to communism. Pablo Escobar threatened the stability of the Colombian government, and FARC, communist guerrillas in Colombia, relied on the cocaine trade to continue waging their insurgency. By convincing the Mexicans to give up cocaine and sell meth, the CIA could reduce Escobar's power in Colombia and undermine FARC. So quite a dense post, and I went into this just looking at the entry title thinking this was going to be crazy, but now I actually kind of like this, and it kind of does make sense given the history between drug cartels and the CIA. Allegedly.
rentals, flights, and stays, including the most gentle.
Tier 7. Walter White and Light Yagami are the same character. Okay, so major spoiler warning for not only Breaking Bad, but also Death Note here. Go ahead and skip this entry if you've never seen this show, because it is a masterpiece in its own regard. Also, get ready for me to yap for a second, because these are two of my favorite characters and TV shows of all time. Okay, so there's obvious, parallels here, right? Both characters are smart, prideful prodigies that see themselves as gods above other people, thinking they're completely superior to everyone around them. Narcissists through and through. Not only are they just generally intelligent, like book smart, they are also highly intelligent emotionally, exceptional manipulators. They both operate under a secret identity and revel in the acknowledgement of their crimes. Both characters have a family member that is trying to catch this alter ego who happens to be them, but they have no clue about it. There's also a task force formed to catch both of them, in which both Hank, Walt's brother-in-law, and Soichiro, Light's father, are involved in, with both Walt and Light interfering with the investigation multiple times. They both have a significant person that helps them commit their crimes that they pretend to care about, but both emotionally manipulate throughout the entire series, with them only being let free when Walt and Light finally die in the end. Speaking of, they both die of a stomach gunshot wound. Well, kind of. Light is bleeding out from his gunshot and then is killed by Ryuk using the Death Note, but he probably would have died anyway. There's a crucial difference though, as Light died not realizing his goals, at least directly, while Walt kind of died satisfied, having done what he loved. Now, one of the biggest things that you might not recognize at first is that both Walter and Light appear to change over the course of the story, becoming more and more evil as it progresses, right? Remember the whole Mr. Chips into Scarface thing? Well, it seems like this actually is all just a facade, and in both cases, this is just who they were from the beginning. It's only their circumstances which prevented their true selves from coming out into the spotlight any earlier. Walt's ego and macho personality was never able to thrive in his position as a school teacher. His inferiority complex prevented him from becoming involved in crime and showing his real love for the game, even admitting in the finale that he did it for himself and he liked it. He lies to himself throughout the entire series, saying he's doing it for his family, which he knows deep down is a lie. Light also lies to himself through most of the series, but it's a little more obvious in the case of Light that this man is unhinged since episode 1. The Death Note doesn't turn him crazy. Light is a narcissistic psychopath with a god complex. He says he's trying to get rid of the world's criminals, to help the world, eliminate evil, but quickly his ideals shift as he targets law enforcement and even his own friends and family eventually. Light didn't do it to help the world. He doesn't do it to punish criminals or see justice. He does it because, as he says in episode 1, he wants to become the god of the new world. As you can see, both characters are also incredibly delusional. Light is much, much more evil of a character, not to mention completely insane. He killed hundreds of thousands of people, while Walt maybe killed a few hundred directly and indirectly. It's hard to say. It gets difficult to quantify when you account for the suffering he's caused due to the meth he's cooked as well. But it's safe to say Walt has a soft redemption at the end of the story, where Light kind of has the opposite, falling further into darkness before he's taken out. Another interesting thing that happens to both characters is that they also kill their greatest rivals about 2/3 of the way through their respective stories, only to build their empires to their peak before they slowly crumble around them. So while some things are different about the characters, and their synopses for their shows couldn't be any more different, it's easy to see why so many comparisons are made between the two characters. And if you haven't seen Death Note yet, but you are a fan of Breaking Bad, I highly recommend you check it out. I promise you will not regret it, even if you don't like anime. Lost Better Call Saul comics. So, did you know that Better Call Saul, for the premiere of Season 2, created a promotional comic book series with 6 known issues parodying superheroes and featuring Jimmy McGill? Because I definitely didn't know about this for the longest time. And guess what? This is another piece of Breaking Bad lost media, as only the first 2 issues have been found. Chuck faked his death. Like I said, some wild theories were on the way, and this is one of them. Somehow, likely as a joke, people suggested that Chuck faked his death. It's hard to even find posts about this because it's so ridiculous, but yeah. This guy literally burned to death. Kind of hard to fake that one.
Chime. Mobile banking. Download today and get started.
Walt Jr. breakfast stats. Thanks to another post on r/Breaking Bad, we have this great image that shows every single instance of Walt Jr. enjoying breakfast, which happens to be a whopping 13 times. This is the moment that Walter Jr. broke fast. Better Call Saul original premise. The original premise for Better Call Saul was quite different from what we got. Instead of the grounded crime drama about our favorite criminal lawyer, we would have gotten a half-hour episodic sitcom with a new weekly guest star coming into Saul's office with their legal troubles. They quickly realized, though, they were better at not only the hour-long television format, but more so focusing on the drama rather than just straight comedy. Of course, both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul have great comedic moments, but it was never the focus of either show, and I'm definitely glad they went this route. I mean, just look at what happened with Slippin' Jimmy. Removed a Margaret scene in pilot. The original pilot script in general has a lot of weird differences from the one we got, like Jesse being named Marion Dupree and being described as a hip Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. There's another scene that had a cut character in the original script, which would have added more context to the scene in the pilot where Walt eats lunch alone in the teacher's lounge. Originally, there was another teacher there named Margaret, who was described as being a science teacher that had a semi-flirtatious relationship with him. This all ended up being cut in favor of him sitting alone and showing his isolation and depressing life circumstances. Ted is Walt Jr.'s real father. Another pretty wild theory that suggests that maybe Walt isn't actually Junior's father, and instead is the love child of Skyler and Ted Beneke. I guess this came about because there might be a little resemblance between Walt Jr. and Ted, as well as the fact that Ted and Skyler later have an affair. But when they reunite in season 2, it's clear they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and probably were not having an affair before this point. If anything, it's more likely that Holly would be Ted's father, rather than Walt Jr. being Ted's son. But others have suggested that since both Walt and Skyler have blue eyes, it's strange that Walt Jr. has brown eyes, just like Ted. Also, when they first meet up again in Season 2, Episode 7, Ted, being friendly, had a remark about Walt Jr. having good genes. Probably just being friendly, like I said, or is he complimenting his own genetics? You be the judge, I guess. Kim's side. This was one of the other theories in regards to Kim's fate in Better Call Saul, before it was eventually revealed officially. This stemmed from the fact that Kim is absent in Breaking Bad, and of course Jimmy is no longer married, which could suggest that she's dead. He even gives Walt an ominous warning, telling him, "Just promise me you won't hang yourself in the closet." A rather odd thing to say, unless Jimmy had personal experience with this, as people thought he might walk in on Kim hanging in the closet. This of course didn't happen though, but Better Call Saul Season 6 had an even more shocking side, if you can believe it, which I'm sure no one saw coming, in the death of Nacho Varga. Evil Juicebox Man. This strange phrase is what was used to describe Walt, and how exactly he got the Lily of the Valley poison to Brock, which was never explained in the actual show. Vince Gilligan himself described their thought process at 2013 Comic-Con, where he says they envisioned him as the evil Juicebox Man, not through Saul or anything like that. Rather, they saw Walt himself going directly to Brock's school to give him the poisoned juice box, or by planting it in his school lunch. A really interesting detail that might back this up is during the finale of Season 4, Face Off, Francesca can be seen shredding various documents in Saul's office. Some of these include class schedules, likely how they found out when and where Brock would be at the school. An insane detail that I'm sure very few picked up on. At least I definitely had no clue about this. South Korean remake. If Metastasis wasn't enough, there is actually a South Korean Breaking Bad remake in the works as well, with 4 seasons currently being planned and the script for Season 1 already having been completed. I'm definitely interested to see how this will turn out, especially given how different life and the culture is in South Korea, not to mention how drastically healthcare differs from the United States, which is one of the main catalysts for the meth cooking in the original show in the first place. Jesse is Jesus theory. Yep, another crazy one here. Thanks again to a theory found on the Breaking Bad subreddit from 11 years ago. The user WCTMPP writes, quote, "As I was watching the finale Sunday, it kept hitting me how Jesse was dressed up to look like a Jesus figure, like around the time of the crucifixion, with his scars, long hair, facial hair, the chains, etc. Now, you could simply dismiss this by saying anyone in Jesse's position for that long, who had lived in a hole for months at a time, would naturally look disheveled with long hair and severely beaten. At the time, I figured I was just reading too much into it. I very well could still be, but then it hit me this morning, the woodworking flashback. What is Jesse's natural calling and talent? Woodworking. What was Jesus' occupation when he wasn't preaching and going around? Carpentry. Vince could have easily given Jesse any kind of artistic, hands-on hobby. Dancing, gardening, working on cars, building, but he specifically went with woodworking. If you go back and watch the scene right after the turret gun stops firing, there are 3 people left physically functioning in the room, along with Todd. Watching the show at the time, you would never notice the string of dialogue, but looking back at the script independent of the scene, Todd's final words are quite interesting. After the shooting is stopped, Todd is hunched over on the ground, looks over and exclaims, "Uncle Jack," to see if he's okay. Then Todd crawls over to the window, peers outside and exclaims, "Jesus," as he's in awe of the damage that's been caused as he gazes upon the weapon. His final words as he turns towards Walt is "Mr. White," as if he's about to say something to him. So his final words are all used in different contexts, but if you look at it on a script, Todd says, "Uncle Jack, Jesus, Mr. White," the 3 remaining guys left in the room. Metaphorically in this episode, perhaps you could argue Jesse's escape is his own resurrection. I don't think Jesse is supposed to be viewed purely as Jesus in this episode, especially since Walt is the one technically providing the sacrifice by jumping on Jesse and shielding him. But I think Gilligan has blatantly put out a couple of less than subtle parallels to show Jesse as the good in the end of this saga. I've never viewed Jesse as a quote-unquote Jesus figure on the show, but in the last couple episodes they have portrayed him as kind of the moral center or control sample of the show. But with so much emphasis on the woodworking theme, I think Gilligan laid it right out there for all of us. Someone agree with me or tell me I'm on crystal meth if I'm way off here.
Hey guys, welcome to the neighborhood.
Definitely getting new countertops. And we need shades right now. Buy now, pay over time. Affirm.
Tier 8. Cooking meth from watching the show. I'm sure many people have wondered, myself included, while watching, if the process for cooking meth that is explained and shown is accurate in any way. Well, some of it is and some of it isn't. The ingredients and such described are, as far as I can tell, the real deal. However, they can't show the real process in full on television for obvious reasons, so it is almost always obscured in some way during the montages. Not only that, but these steps are purposefully placed out of order, so it's kind of impossible to actually figure out how to cook meth just from watching the show, and specifically the cooking montages, which is definitely for the best. Mike is Jesse from the future. Ah yes, my favorite theory. I guess because Mike takes an interest in Jesse almost immediately, becoming kind of a mentor slash father figure for him. Someone thought that he was on a mission to save himself in the past, because the two kind of have similar morals and are both bald white dudes, I guess. So yeah, in summary, I agree. Bravo Vince, theory confirmed. Stoney Westmoreland. On a bit of a darker note, the actor Stoney Westmoreland appeared as Officer Saxton, a small role in both Breaking Bad Season 3 and Better Call Saul Season 2, showing up when Daniel Warmald, aka Lester from GTA, gets his baseball card stolen by Nacho, and also when Skyler calls the cops on Walt in IFT. However, in 2018, the actor was charged with attempting to meet up with a 13-year-old on the dating app Grindr and was arrested in Salt Lake City. He also was subsequently dropped from the Disney sitcom Andy Mack. The pool drove Walt insane theory. Wait, never mind, I changed my mind. This is my favorite theory. The pool is what drove Walt insane. Before you write this off as just another insane conspiracy theory, let me read off this fan theory's Reddit post. Quote, spoilers for Breaking Bad follow, but honestly, who hasn't seen it at this point? Come on. I wholeheartedly recognize that this is pretty crazy, but bear with me. This theory is the result of rewatching Breaking Bad while also reading House of Leaves. The pool is what drove Walt to cook meth, and what gradually ripped the White family apart. Yes, the swimming pool. From the outset of Breaking Bad, there's something kind of off about their house. It's nice, but weirdly claustrophobic, and never gives off the sense of being really lived in. It never really seems to come across as an actual home. And then there's the backyard swimming pool. Keep in mind, Walt is working 2 jobs at this point to make ends meet. They are financially troubled, to say the least, and yet they have a pool, and a nice one at that. But what's odd is that no one in the family ever seems to use it. It's purely aesthetic for these people, a facade of success. I would submit that the pool is a visual metaphor for the American dream and the vanity of middle-class America. The Whites are living beyond their means in a home they don't even enjoy simply for the sake of appearances. Note how the pool is only used as a social device in the show. They stand around it at parties, and whenever they have company over, it's their way of posturing, of keeping up appearances. Yet that trophy gradually starts to turn on them and consume them. The pool gradually becomes a place of aggression, greed, and lies. It's where the family turns on each other and loses their moral compass. In fact, the absolute lowest moment for Walt, when he decides to poison Brock, is made at its edges, staring in. All of his worst decisions are made staring contemplatively into the water. He's hypnotized by it. Now, the most accurate way to view this is the pool as a representation, a thing Walt looks at and is reminded of his envy and his financial hubris. But the way I find more fun is to think of the pool as alive in some way. Alive and malevolent and hungry. That moment when Skyler tries to drown herself, look at the way she stares at it, hypnotized like Walt, and is eventually drawn in. It's like the thing is eating her. It used Walt to break her down and then tries to take her. Keep in mind, this is the first time we see someone actually go in the damn pool to die. And in its final appearance, when Walt goes back to the house for the final time and it's been drained, we can look at it 2 ways. One is that this empty former trophy has become a mockery to Walter, a symbol of how hollow his pursuit was from the beginning. Or with that clatter of skateboarders using the thing as a half-pipe, the pool has found one last way to lash out. It's laughing. It's only disarmed when the family drops their facade once and for all, but it's taken everything from these people. I think the analysis of the pool being a sort of posturing device for Walt and his ego is actually spot on. I agree with that. It seems he's oddly proud of it, always sitting around it and cleaning it, but never actually going in it. It's more of a status symbol for him, like he made it, even though he has no real use for it. But the pool being alive, yeah. Todd was going to f*** Jesse. So, believe it or not, as revealed by Thomas Schnauz on Twitter, at one point in time during the planning process, an idea was thrown around that Todd was going to have sex with Jesse. Clearly, this is a very different direction from where they went with the story, and when asked to further clarify this on Twitter, he said, quote, "We just went a different direction with the character. We flowchart lots of ideas. I can't remember why specifically we didn't do it, but we liked the direction that ended up on screen best." Tuco torture episode. And we saved the best for last here. A truly unhinged and insane idea posed for the original draft of Season 1. One so insane, as I tell you this, keep in mind this was discussed by Vince Gilligan on the Insider podcast and is not some made-up creepypasta. So remember how I said Jesse was originally going to be killed at the end of Season 1? Well, he was going to be killed off by this unnamed character that would later become Tuco. Later on, after this, it was planned that Walt would capture him, tie him up in his crawl space, and torture him for days on end in gruesome ways. Like cutting off each of his toes and cauterizing the wounds so he wouldn't die. All the while, he's hooked up to some insane saw trap-esque contraption, a shotgun with a tripwire, that he can pull at any time to relieve his suffering. A truly disturbing and sadistic scene that feels all sorts of out of character for Walt. And if you had thought that was bad, the ultimate fate of Tuco, or the character in this scene, was he stayed alive until Walt Jr. eventually found him in the crawl space, and only then triggered the trap to take himself and Walt's son with him. Absolutely wild that this was even considered, and really makes you wonder just what other crazy ideas they thought of in the writing room that never saw the light of day. Although I'm willing to bet that this one definitely takes the cake. And that's the end of the Breaking Bad iceberg. Let me know what you think. Anything interesting that wasn't included, let me know. What was your favorite piece of weird trivia from the show, or entry on this list, or one that you didn't know? Anyways, shout out to Breaking Bad, amazing show, go watch it again or watch my ranking videos. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, peace out. It's finally time. Breaking Bad. A show that needs no introduction. Everyone knows what it is, everyone's seen it, and it's pretty much recognized as the greatest TV show of all time, which is a pretty crazy feat. But even all these years later, it's still one of the most praised and talked about series ever. Even in the golden age of television, this was the one that stood out above the rest. So what made Breaking Bad so special? Was it the great writing, amazing performances, cinematography, plot, characters? Well, it doesn't really boil down to just one element. Rather, I think Breaking Bad is the perfect storm when it comes to
I shop for a lot of the same things. That's why I like Paze, the online checkout from the same banks.
Nice hearing from you, Carlos.
Welcome to the early 2000s, when horror was loud, in your face, and not worried about a thing. Horror fans were spoiled with theatrical releases happening regularly. So much so that some weeks saw more than one big horror title opening on the big screen at the same time. Fans were treated to everything, including serial killers, slashers, ghosts, and aliens. There was a bit of everything for everyone, but in pure early 2000s style. A lot of films were all style, all gore, and all fun.
Oh, this is another one of those onion things, isn't it?
No, this is one of those drop it and leave it alone things.
Why don't you want to talk about it?
Why do you want to talk about it?
This was the only way to follow the late 1990s and the revival of many subgenres and careers. 13 Ghosts was, and still is, easily one of the most enjoyable entries from 2001, with gory, spooky, sexy ghosts throughout and a fun cast to go with it. Critics pretty much hated the film if the 18% it has on Rotten Tomatoes is any indication, with the audience being just a little more generous with the film. As for me, well, I love it.
It's marvelous, though, isn't it? A living work of art.
It's a favorite from the era and one that gets rewatched a couple of times per year. It's a fun one to watch on your own or with a group. It's silly, it knows it wants you to have fun. So, fun I had. The film gets a solid 9 out of 10 for me, to tell you how much I love this one. Back in the day, I would have given it a 12 out of 10, but the years have made me less extreme while more movies have been watched, like a small 1,000 per year on average, which means that I am less likely to go crazy for a movie. However, back in the day, I remember clearly seeing this in the second-run theater. Like I said, the films were coming at us fast and furious that year, and there were just too many releases to manage to see all of them in just the first week.
How depraved is that?
If you haven't noticed, I'm a little bit of a freak!
The second-run theater downtown Montreal, yes, there was still one in 2001, which they called a move-over theater, was a gift from the horror heavens. They had a steady stream of horror films, and you could easily do a double or triple feature without breaking the bank. So, one day, a friend and I ventured downtown and saw a few films, including 13 Ghosts, which made me so freaking happy. It was back in my early days of reviewing, and I had not been tasked with reviewing it, so I just enjoyed it for the sake of enjoyment. That is something I keep reminding myself to do these days, just watch movies for fun, then write about them. How do I come to such a high mark of the film now? Over 20 years after its original release, when I loved it so much, I pre-ordered the DVD right after seeing it for the first time. Well, it's simple, so keep with me. By the way, that DVD just came in one of those snap-closed cardboard boxes, just like its remake, Best Buddy House on the Hill.
Justice.
Similarly to that film, 13 Ghosts is a remake of a Castle film, and it updates the story for current sensibilities or lack thereof. That DVD showed up, I had to trek back downtown to pick it up, then went home, and I went to watch the film a few too many times. These days, I still watch it regularly on the very same DVD, but not to the point of knowing all the lines by heart still. I also know full well that this is not a masterpiece, but it's pretty close if you ask me, hence the 9 out of 10. To me, it is a masterpiece. To some, it's more of a disaster piece. But as long as it's being enjoyed, it makes me happy, no matter what they call it or rate it. So, what's the story here? Well, it's a haunted house, but with a twist.
Wow, you can see right through it.
Huh. You guys couldn't afford any walls?
How weird.
After losing their wife and mother and house in a fire, a family composed of Dad Arthur, daughter Kelly, and son Bobby have added a sassy nanny named Maggie to bring a bit of comedic relief to their lives, or at least the film.
Bobby, don't call your sister a slut.
Thank you, Maggie. I prefer the term bitch. One day, as they worry about money and making it while living in what is considered a small apartment, having no money, yet having the budget to have a nanny who does nothing on staff. Hey, I heard that. They receive a visit from a lawyer. Of course, at first, the mature for her age daughter worries about collections or if they're going to lose even more. Turns out, they had a rich, eccentric uncle who just passed away and left them his insane house and fortune. With a bit of convincing, they all head out to their new home to check out the digs. And what a house it is! Once there, they bump into a man from the opening. Except they don't know that he knew the uncle and had an exceptionally bad time with him in a junkyard collecting some ghosts for the uncle's collection. Soon, this man manages to go in the house with them under the pretense that he's from the power company and he needs to do his job. The family and the lawyer go over some stuff. The father worries about the cost of maintenance and the daughter worries about how big the bathrooms are. Soon, things take a turn with the help of the not from the power company man named Dennis, and he shows his true colors and warns them about the ghosts imprisoned in the house.
Ghosts? Ghosts! Ghosts, goddammit, listen to me!
Chaos ensues, we get to see a bunch of ghosts, 12 to be exact, and get to wonder when the 13th ghost will show up. These ghosts are not particularly scary, but their appearances are spooky enough. Sexy, even in one case. As they run through the house with the moving walls, using special glasses to see the ghosts, the lawyer bites it spectacularly, and a new character enters the mayhem, a psychic or ghost whisperer named Kalina, who may or may not have good intentions. The mayhem escalates, the film gets louder and more visually violent, and we get the ending where the 13th ghost is revealed in an almost too sweet sequence for this viewer. Still, the film ends pretty quick with minimal bloodshed from the leads and a closing song by Raw Digga, who plays Maggie in the film. Now, is that story groundbreaking? Absolutely not. You better believe that it is fun, though. The story itself has just a few issues and a few things thrown in there for...
My moderate to severe ulcerative colitis symptoms kept me out of the picture. Now, I have Skyrizi.
Keeping my plans, I'm feeling free. Control of how you see means everything to me. Control is everything to me.
Now, I'm back in the picture. Skyrizi helps deliver relief, repair, and remission in UC. Feel significant symptom relief at 4 weeks, including fewer bowel movements and less bleeding. Skyrizi is proven to help visibly repair colon lining damage and help people achieve remission at 12 weeks and 1 year.
Don't use if allergic. Serious allergic reactions, increased infections, or lower ability to fight them may occur. Before treatment, get checked for infections and TB. Tell your doctor about any flu-like symptoms or vaccines. Liver problems leading to hospitalization may occur when treated for UC.
Take control of your UC.
Control is everything to me.
Ask your gastroenterologist about Skyrizi.
Come on, Professor.
At Origin, we don't just make pet food, we nourish your companion's adventures. Origin, whole prey ingredients to nourish amazing. Visit OriginPetFoods.com for a chance to win tickets to Disney's Mufasa the Lion King. Only in theaters December 20th, rated PG.
Convenience.
Why not?
Some characters know things just out of the blue, and some things are forgotten when it's practical, but none of this takes away from the fun of it.
They wait for you to stick your face right up against the glass, and then they give you a big fat boo. Don't do that!
The opening sequence in the junkyard is awesome. It's based on the evil of man collecting souls and not letting them rest. It's violent and even a bit vile in the reasoning for it. It's one hell of an opening sequence, though, and it really pulls you in.
A foot full of blood? You gotta be shit.
The ending has some schmaltzy stuff that is just a bit too sugary sweet for this viewer, but it works in the insanity that the film is. The middle of it, the meat of the film, is where the ghosts show up, and that is where the fun is. If you are a fan of well-executed practical special effects and crazy character designs, this is the film for you. The ghosts each have their own backstory. They have a specific design that is their own, and the film doesn't shy away from giving them wounds, and even from having one of them basically being nude. This is how you do over-the-top horror. This is how you throw everything at the screen and hope it all sticks. And it does.
I lose an entire family in a glass house.
The ghosts are basically the main reason to see the film, that and the performances for the ghosts and their would-be victims.
How'd you know we'd be safe?
I didn't.
The fact that most of the work is practical effects is a very big reason to love this film. Of course, there's some early 2000 CGI, which has aged like early 2000 CGI. It has its issues, but it's easy to look past it. Another effect here is the use of quick cuts and fast editing for effects, and well, it's annoying. While it's dynamic looking and it makes sense with the visions that Dennis Rafkin has, the quick cuts and flashes are more headache-inducing than excitement creating in my old age.
You're behind enemy lines.
While this was just a part of the film in 2001, watching with my 20-year-old eyes now, it's a bit more of a problem. Those sensitive to flashing lights or show effects should try and watch this in full light to avoid this issue, or may just want to skip the film entirely. Which is too bad, as it's just a big miss to skip this one. The acting, oh, the acting. Is the acting great?
It's gonna sound completely whacked, all right? But just stay with me.
Let's not kid ourselves. There's no way this would be a best acting sort of film. Still though, the acting is decent while being over the top.
We've struck gold.
Somewhere between Matthew Lillard's performance as Dennis and Rod Digga's performance as Maggie, the film almost goes into schlock, and the two of them choose some scenery together so beautifully well it becomes an art form.
Can I rely on you not to get me killed? I guarantee you nothing.
The acting from Tony Shalhoub, Shannon Elizabeth, Alec Roberts, and J.R. Bourne is okay. Where things go full tilt cheesy is with the performance by F. Murray Abraham as the rich uncle. His work here makes it look like he's just relishing the part and loving the chance at being an eccentric old kook. And Beth Davids, unfortunately, doesn't always seem like she's in the same film as the rest of the cast. She's okay, but something about her performance just feels off. She does not seem to be having as much fun as the rest of the cast. The cast for The Ghost does good work in their limited time on screen, and they bring the characters to life without a word, making it all about the physical performance. They also clearly understand the assignment here. Ghosts, spooky, but not run the audience out of the room scary. More of them would be great. You know, like that treatment other films are getting. Something like a series about the ghosts, their lives, how they died, how they became trapped. Sorry, I can't avoid thinking about how awesome the possibilities would be here.
Congratulations. You get to become the 13th ghost. Now get on your feet.
Let's get back to the story here, to its writing. 13 Ghosts was written by Rob White, Neil Marshall Stevens, and Richard DeVidio. White is credited with the story here, and the other two wrote the script. As a remake of the 1960 film 13 Ghosts, this version credits its creator, and of course takes some of the original along with some serious liberties to make this the most 2001 movie that ever 2001. Their work here, along with that of director Steve Beck, created an adaptation that pissed off some people to say the least, but personally, I love it. It's silly, it has ghosts, it's loud, it's in your face, and it's exactly what it wants to be. It clearly has not won over every viewer out there, but I have to say, so what? Seriously, just put it on and have fun with it.
What are you doing? What did I just say? Did I just say there's a petting zoo downstairs? No.
Speaking of things that are oh so 2001, check out the soundtrack for this film. Like, seriously. Even if you don't watch the film, check out the soundtrack online. The songs, including the one by Rod Digga that closes the film, are very dated yet fun. Another song used here is Excess by Tricky, with uncredited vocals by Alanis Morissette.
That's me.
Which was reused the following year on the soundtrack to another fantastically cheesy horror film, Queen of the Damned.
Wait! Hey! I need to talk to someone. I don't believe this!
This is not an exercise. This is a police patrol.
Hey, I'm sorry.
The score by John Frizzell is almost subdued at times, something that is almost shocking considering the film. The music is close to classical and feel at first, then as things ramp up in the film, the score adds noises that are not exactly music but help layer the sound and create the exact right atmosphere. It does highlight and direct the tension at times, creating a sound that brings excitement and spookiness out of the film when needed. This is a score that when taken on its own, does not say 2001 as loud as the soundtrack does. It's effective and it can almost work on its own, and a few of the tracks are easy to listen to without the movie on. Of course, the later tracks are meant to spook and to create chaos, so those are not so much something to listen to while you cook dinner or read a book.
Greatness requires sacrifice. Now I have a job to do.
13 Ghosts is kind of a cult film at this point, having its fandom truly loving it and having its detractor truly hating it. Both great signs for longevity in the horror genre. The film has aged, yes. It is also very much a product of its time, but it's still so much fun these days, both for a chaotic horror watch and as a party movie where you can easily come in and out of watching it without getting lost in the story.
I don't want you guys to move from this spot. We'll be right back.
Could it have been a more serious horror film with deeper connections to the viewer? A more profound look at the ethics of what was being done to those poor souls trapped in the house, and even a more subtle approach to scares? Absolutely.
It's time to leave.
I'll take your word for it.
Did it need to be these things to be enjoyed? Absolutely not. 13 Ghosts is effective and enjoyable as it is. It's not meant to be a serious film, and clearly those involved in making it understood the assignment. The film is a boatload of fun with good special effects, fun ghost appearances, a cast that goes for it, and a filmmaker that knew what he was working with and wasn't ashamed to make it a blast. Fans of 13 Ghosts, like me, still rewatch it today, and were vocal enough to get a super duper Blu-ray release of it recently with new artwork and all kinds of goodies on the disc. Now, Do I have that version? Not yet. I'm still deeply attached to my cheap cardboard box that snaps shut.
I am sick of this nanny shit. I've had it. This was not in the job description. I quit!
$0 Grubhub delivery fees with Prime. Eligible orders only. Terms and additional fees apply.
When director Sean S. Cunningham set out to make the original Friday the 13th, he was trying to craft a cinematic roller coaster ride. He wanted the audience to have fun while being scared. He hoped they would jump and laugh and be shocked by the gory murders. And he was very successful at what he set out to do. His little independent production was such a crowd-pleasing thrill ride, it became one of the biggest hits of 1980 and spawned a franchise that is still going on to this day. So let's celebrate Friday the 13th by looking back and figuring out what the happened to this horror movie. In the early months of 1979, Cunningham asked Here Come the Tigers and Manny's Orphans writer Victor Miller to come up with something along the lines of Halloween. The two would meet every morning to go over the details. As Cunningham told Crystal Lake Memories author Peter Bracke, the idea was to set the story in a remote location and put a lot of young people in jeopardy. He said, quote, "Then we went down the list. Are they in jeopardy from a real force or an imaginative one? Who's going to survive, if anyone? Locations were kicked around too. How about an apartment building, or a fun house, or an amusement park?" Miller also considered setting the story in a high school. Then he thought of a place he had been afraid of in his own childhood, summer camp. Miller pitched the idea of setting the story at a summer camp before it opens, so they wouldn't have to bring in a bunch of young extras to play campers. Cunningham loved the idea, so Miller wrote the script. Miller's script establishes that Camp Crystal Lake is a place that has seen much bad luck over the years. It has earned the nickname Camp Blood. A young boy drowned there in 1957. The following year, 2 counselors were murdered by an unknown assailant, and we see those murders in the film's opening sequence. The camp closed down after that, and every attempt to reopen it has been met with sabotage. The water was bad. There were mysterious fires on the property. But now Steve Christie, the son of the camp's owners, has decided to give the place another try. He sinks a lot of money into fixing it up. He hires the counselors, who gather together at the camp before opening day. And on Friday, June 13th, someone starts picking them off one by one. Someone who wants to make sure the camp stays closed. In the end, final surviving counselor finds out who the killer is. Mrs. Voorhees, who used to be a cook at the camp until her son drowned there in 1957. His name was Jason. Mrs. Voorhees blamed the counselors for her son's death. Driven insane by the loss of her child, she has been killing people and sabotaging the camp to avenge him. The title on Miller's script was Long Night at Camp Blood, but Cunningham had a different title in mind. In the July 4th edition of Variety, he took out a full-page ad announcing that he was going to be making a movie called Friday the 13th. The ad promised this would be the most terrifying film ever made. He couldn't believe that nobody else had used the title Friday the 13th before. He fully expected to hear that he couldn't use the title because it was already taken. And in fact, there was a movie set for a November 1979 release called Friday the 13th, The Orphan. But the makers of that movie were easily dealt with, and it didn't get much attention when it was released anyway. So the path was clear for Cunningham to make his own Friday the 13th. Most of the responses he got about the ad were distribution queries and offers from investors, which he needed because he had a budget of $500,000 in mind. Special effects artist Tom Savini, who had just provided the the gut-munching and head explosions for George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. Almost $20,000 of the Friday the 13th budget went toward the creation of Savini's effects. When crafting the script, Cunningham and Miller had decided that all of the murders should be committed with bladed weapons. The kills had to be personal, hand-to-hand, no guns. That would be too impersonal. Savini, who sees gore effects as bloody magic tricks, did an incredible job of making those kills work on the screen. The kills are gross and shocking, but the effects are fascinating to look at. Over the years, it has been suggested that slasher movies are morality plays, that the murders are punishment for characters who have sex or do drugs. That wasn't on Cunningham's mind when he was making Friday the 13th. To him, the movie was about untimely, unwarranted death. The characters aren't killed because they did anything wrong. They're at Camp Crystal Lake. They're going to die no matter what they do. As Cunningham said, the idea was to show that, quote, there is a hostile world out there that wants to destroy you. There's no rhyme or reason to it. By making a contribution to the Boy Scouts of America, the production was able to secure a Boy Scout camp in New Jersey as the primary filming location. And on September 4th, 1979, 7 weeks of filming began. Cunningham was able to assemble a solid cast of New York-based actors to bring the characters to life. The idea being that he wanted people who looked like real kid-next-door types. The ill-fated counselors in the film are played by Mark Nelson, Laurie Bartram, Janine Taylor, Deborah S. Hayes, Bing Crosby's son, Harry Crosby, future A-lister Kevin Bacon, and Willie Adams, who is also a production assistant. Robbie Morgan plays a counselor who looks like she could turn out to be the survivor. Then she gets knocked off early on, like Janet Leigh in Psycho. Peter Brower, who was dating the assistant director, was cast as Steve Christie. Cunningham considered playing Officer Dorff himself, but ended up casting Ron Milkey, even though he clearly couldn't ride a motorcycle. Ron Carroll was cast as Sergeant Tierney. Rex Everhart plays a truck driver who believes Camp Crystal Lake is Jinx. Walt Gorney plays a character known as Crazy Ralph.
It's got a death curse.
Cunningham wasn't sure about including the Crazy Ralph character, but he turned out to be a fan favorite. Fingers were crossed that they would be able to get a known name like Sally Field or Meryl Streep to play the survivor, Alice. But that was a pipe dream. The role went to another New York-based unknown, Adrienne King, who proved to be quite capable of playing a terrified young woman who was forced to take violent action against an attacker. And Cunningham was able to get a well-known name to play the attacker, Mrs. Voorhees. His first choice was Estelle Parsons, who had won an Oscar for her role in Bonnie and Clyde. That didn't work out because Parsons wanted a percentage of the profit, so he made an offer to Betsy Palmer. Palmer had a screen acting career that went back to the early 1950s and was a household name due to her many appearances as a celebrity panelist on game shows. The role of Mrs. Voorhees was the opposite of what Palmer was known for. No one would have expected her to play a character like this, and she wouldn't have if she didn't need a new car at the time. She needed about $10,000 to buy the car she wanted, and Friday the 13th would pay her $1,000 a day for 10 days of work. It was the perfect deal, and Palmer was so perfect in the role, most people today remember her as Mrs. Voorhees more than any other character she played. Mrs. Voorhees doesn't show up until the end of the film. The character is never even directly mentioned until she introduces herself to Alice, which makes it impossible for viewers to guess who's doing the killing. Palmer pointed out to Cunningham that he wasn't playing fair with the mystery. She said, quote, "You're not even giving anybody a loose clue that I'm on the scene. They should at least have a glimpse of this woman somewhere earlier in the film. You should put me in that little diner Steve Christie visits, or at a stoplight in my Jeep. Whatever, just a flash somewhere." But Cunningham wasn't interested in providing clues earlier in the movie. It has been said that working on Friday the 13th was really like going to summer camp. They were working in a beautiful, although sometimes creepy location. There was a joking, carefree atmosphere on the set, but that doesn't mean everything went smoothly. The production ran into some money issues. Cinematographer Barry Abrams begged to have more lights to use, but they didn't have the money to buy more lights. So once night falls in the movie, it is quite dark. They couldn't afford stunt doubles for King and Palmer, so the actors had to perform all their fights themselves. Savini doubled for Bartram in a moment where her character's corpse is tossed through a window. Crosby was temporarily blinded by a chemical used in the fake blood mix. A real snake was killed for the scene where a snake is found in Alice's cabin, a scene that was written to show that the counselors could use violence to defend themselves if necessary, which it turns out to be. The opening sequence showing the murder of two counselors in 1958 was supposed to be bigger. It was going to take place outside and include a chase around the boathouse, but when it started snowing and the generator died, they had to film the whole scene inside a barn that had its own power source. It took 3 tries to film the most famous scene in the movie, the climactic jump scare, which was included because the jump scare ending of Carrie had been so popular a few years earlier. It's a scene that Victor Miller, Ron Kurz, and Tom Savini all separately take credit for coming up with. There's also disagreement over who deserves credit for Jason's appearance. Miller had only vaguely implied that the child might have been mentally impaired. Kurz said he was the one who suggested Jason should have physical deformities as well. Savini says it was his idea. And there is no question that Savini was the one who created the makeup effect that was worn by actor Ari Lehman. Cunningham had considered casting his own son Noel Cunningham as Jason, but his wife didn't want their son to spend so much time in that cold water. So he cast Lehman, who had worked with him on Manny's Orphans. That jump scare, presumably a nightmare, was the perfect way to end the onslaught of shocks and thrills Cunningham had put together. And the film's effectiveness was greatly enhanced when paired with the score composed by Cunningham's old friend Harry Manfredini. Manfredini only had enough money to record the music in a friend's basement with 13 instrument players, but he turned in one of horror's great, iconic scores and one of its most popular sound effects. Manfredini wanted to create a specific sound to put in the film anytime the killer was present, letting the viewers know the characters were in danger in that moment. Inspiration came from a scene where Mrs. Voorhees is shown to be talking to herself in Jason's voice, saying, "Kill her, Mummy." Manfredini spoke the sounds of the words "kill" and "mummy" into a microphone and ran it through an echo reverberation machine, ending up with that iconic sound that has been used throughout the franchise. A franchise that happened because this little independent production managed to get major studio distribution. When Cunningham screened Friday the 13th for the Hollywood studios, a bidding war broke out between Paramount, Warner Brothers, MGM, and United Artists. Paramount, which was looking for independent acquisitions to fill in spaces in their release slate, won the domestic distribution rights with a bid of $1.5 million. Warner Brothers landed the international rights. A marketing campaign was put together that focused on the film's shocking murders. Murders which made it to the screen largely intact, while future entries in the series would be forced to remove bloodshed by the Motion Picture Ratings Board. This one scraped by, with only 9 seconds having to be cut to secure an R rating. Sensing that there could be a very enthusiastic audience for this film, Paramount decided to give it a wide release. It reached 1,127 screens in the United States on May 9th, 1980. And it was a huge hit. A $5.8 million opening weekend was the first step on the way to the film earning almost $40 million at the global box office. It was the 17th highest grossing film of the year. It's easy to see why Friday the 13th was such a box office draw. Cunningham and his collaborators had managed to make a deeply unnerving film. Friday the 13th is often written off as nothing but a Halloween cash-in, or overshadowed by the franchise it spawned. It doesn't get as much respect as it deserves, being a classic in its own right. There's a reason it made so much money. It's a great horror movie, a crowd pleaser, a roller coaster, just like Cunningham intended. With all the success came backlash from people who found this type of entertainment to be repugnant. The Catholic League of Decency condemned the film. It was named a video nasty in the United Kingdom. Some critics were appalled, with Gene Siskel going so far as to spoil the ending in his review and then encourage the outraged public to send letters to Paramount and Betsy Palmer, shaming them for being involved with Friday the 13th. He provided information on how to reach out to them. Luckily, he gave the wrong address for Palmer, so she didn't see as many letters about it. Later in the year, Siskel and Roger Ebert dedicated an episode of their TV show to discussing films like Friday the 13th, with Siskel suggesting they should be outlawed like bullfights. Of course, seeing people like Siskel and Ebert freak out over the movie just made the public want to go watch it even more. Friday the 13th raked in so much cash over the summer of 1980, a sequel was soon on the fast track to be released in May of 1981. Second unit director Steve Miner stepped up to take the helm of Friday the 13th Part 2, working from a screenplay by Ron Kurz. The problem was they had to figure out who would be doing the killing, since Mrs. Voorhees hadn't made it to the end of the first film. Georgetown Productions, Phil Scudari, knew exactly who the killer should be. His name was Jason, and we know how that turned out.
Friday the 13th. You may only see it once.
When you can't pick up your lucky shirt, Courier on Uber can. Send and receive your things. Courier, now on Uber.
The original Friday the 13th was an independent film from Georgetown Productions, made on an initial budget of around $500,000. Then, the major Hollywood studio Paramount Pictures picked up the domestic distribution rights and gave the film a wide theatrical release. It performed beyond anyone's wildest expectations, pulling in $40 million in North America alone and becoming one of the highest-grossing films of 1980. It was the second biggest film of the summer, behind The Empire Strikes Back.
Impressive. Most impressive.
With a return on investment like that, getting a sequel off the ground as soon as possible was a no-brainer. But how do you make a follow-up to a film where nearly every character was murdered and the villain was decapitated? We're about to find out, because we're digging into the making of Friday the 13th Part 2 with this episode of What the Happened to This Horror Movie?
I'm gonna give it to you straight about Jason. His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned.
Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, from a screenplay by Victor Miller, Friday the 13th starred Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees, who was working as a cook at Camp Crystal Lake when her young son Jason drowned there. More than 20 years after Jason's death, the son of the camp's owners tried to open the place again, so Mrs. Voorhees killed him and the new counselors he hired, all except one. A counselor named Alice Hardy, played by Adrienne King, was able to fight back against Mrs. Voorhees and cut off her head with a machete. Alice was safe. But Cunningham wanted to throw one last jump scare at the audience, so he added a scene, presumably a nightmare, where the long-dead Jason jumps out of Crystal Lake to pull Alice out of her canoe. This moment was just put in there as a joke to the audience, a way to startle them before they left the theater.
And Jason as a character hadn't existed. He was just this gag at the end with Ari Lehman coming up out of the water.
But it ended up serving as the foundation for a franchise. Friday the 13th was released on May 9th, 1980. By July, Paramount and the producers at Georgetown were in agreement that they needed to make a sequel. I want to thank you guys for watching What the Happened to This Horror Movie, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
Friday the 13th, Part 2. The body count continues.
Filming was scheduled to begin in September. They just needed to figure out the story. Cunningham and Miller suggested using the title Friday the 13th for an anthology series. Every year, a new movie would be released that would take place around Friday the 13th. There would be no story connections between the films and no returning characters. John Carpenter would later suggest doing the same thing with the Halloween franchise. The anthology idea was shot down in both counts. The higher-ups wanted Friday the 13th Part 2 to be a direct sequel, and the Georgetown producers, particularly a man named Phil Scudari, insisted that Jason be at the center of the film. This is the point at which some members of the first film's creative team started distancing themselves from the sequel. Cunningham didn't want to direct something that was going to be too similar to the movie he had just made. Miller didn't want to write about Jason. Jason was dead.
Jason Voorhees is dead.
He wasn't. There was no point to the first movie. Special effects artist Tom Savini agreed. He thought the idea of making the sequel about Jason was so dumb, he chose to work on a different camp slasher movie, The Burning, instead. The first choice to replace Savini was Stan Winston, but he was too busy doing anything other than help create the severed head of Mrs. Voorhees. He suggested that the filmmakers get in contact with legendary effects artist Dick Smith, who was a hero of Savini's, and Smith pointed them in the direction of Carl Fullerton, whose work was impressive enough that it was believed he would be the next Savini. Georgetown didn't have to look far to find replacements for Cunningham and Miller. Steve Miner had been working with Cunningham since being a production assistant and assistant editor on the 1972 Wes Craven film The Last House on the Left, which Cunningham had produced. He was an associate producer, production manager, and second unit director on Friday the 13th, and when Georgetown asked him to produce the sequel, he decided to pitch himself as the director as well. He figured he could do as good a job as anyone else would, and felt he understood what horror fans and the audience had enjoyed from the first movie and would want in part two. Cunningham agreed to vouch for Miner as director, as long as Miner hired his wife, Susan E. Cunningham, as editor. The deal was made. A writer named Ron Kurtz had done some uncredited rewrites on the first film and added the scene with the motorcycle cop, so he was hired to write the script for the sequel. The title on the script he wrote was simply Jason. Scudari worked closely with Kurtz while he was crafting the script, giving him ideas during their regular meetings, suggesting kills and acting them out in the middle of busy restaurants. One thing Kurtz didn't fully write out was the opening of the film, which finds Alice Hardy is staying in the town of Crystal Lake 2 months after she stopped Mrs. Voorhees' killing spree. Adrienne King wasn't given a copy of the script when she arrived on set. She was just told to improvise.
Come on, Mom. We've been through all of this before. I just have to put my life back together, and this is the only way I know how.
While we're catching up with Alice, we're also aware that someone is lurking outside her house. And our first glimpse of Jason comes when we see his legs crossing the street in front of Alice's place. Not only is this the first thing we see of the adult Jason, it's also the only time in the franchise that Jason was played by a woman. Those legs belong to costume designer Ellen Lutter. After an extended sequence that includes what may be the fastest shower in history, Alice finds Mrs. Voorhees' severed head in her refrigerator, and the dead woman's son is standing right behind her, holding an ice pick. Alice survived the first movie, but she doesn't even make it 13 minutes into part 2. Different reasons have been given for why Alice isn't in the movie longer. Some say the decision makers wanted to focus on new characters. Some say King's agent asked for too much money. But King has said she requested that she be given a short amount of screen time in the sequel because she was being tormented by a stalker in her personal life at this point.
I had someone who came into my life, a very bizarre situation. It was a person who was obsessed.
Once Alice has been killed, the story jumps ahead 5 years. A man named Paul Holt has opened a place called the Packanack Counselor Training Center, across the lake from the now abandoned Camp Crystal Lake. Locals disagree with his decision, feeling that he's asking for trouble by opening a new place so close to the old camp.
Things have been quiet for 5 years, and that's the way we want to keep it.
But that doesn't stop counselors from arriving for their training course. But the locals, including the returning character Crazy Ralph, still hanging around to tell people they're doomed if they go out near the lake, are right to be concerned. As soon as the counselors get set up at Packanack, people start getting picked off one by one. The first person to get killed at the Counselor Training Center is Crazy Ralph, who didn't heed his own warning. To bring Packanack to the screen, Miner and his crew were able to find an awesome location in Kent, Connecticut. Unfortunately, the locations from this movie really do seem to have been cursed.
It's got a death curse.
The only ones still around are the places that stand in for the town of Crystal Lake. The phone booth characters are shown using isn't there anymore. It was fake to begin with, but the buildings remain. Sadly, the house Alice was staying in has since been demolished. The bar characters go to burned to the ground soon after filming was completed. And a few years ago, someone bought the campground and took out the cabins. A house now stands on the spot where Packanack Lodge used to be. You can still visit the locations from most of the other Friday the 13th movies, but there's not much left to visit from this one.
Camp Crystal Lake has changed.
Miner was aiming high when he went into production on Friday the 13th Part 2. He set out to make the most terrifying film ever, and he felt he could accomplish this while sticking to the structure of the first movie. But he wanted to make sure his film would top its predecessor by having more realistic characters and better dialogue. The sequel also had a higher budget, allowing Miner to give it a more polished look with more camera movement. They even had a Steadicam to use for this one. Kurtz was successful in writing a good bunch of likable characters, and while viewers often pick on the acting in 80s horror movies,
What are you kids doing out here?
Miner was able to assemble a solid cast for this one. A lot of counselors show up at Packanack, but several of them are background extras. In addition to Paul, who's played by John Fury, the ones we focus on are the counselors who will have a reason to stay behind at Packanack while Paul goes into town with everyone else to celebrate a successful first day of training. They are Bill Randolph and Marta Culber as Jeff and his girlfriend Sandra, who gets them in trouble when she becomes fascinated with the story of Camp Crystal Lake and wants to see the place for herself. After a police officer catches them wandering too close to the old camp, Paul punishes them by making them stay at Packanack that night. Kirsten Baker plays Terry, who doesn't leave because her little dog Muffin has gone missing.
Muffin?
Russell Todd plays Scott, who stays at Packanack because he wants some extra time to creep on Terry. The producers at Georgetown requested that there be a character in a wheelchair, and that turned out to be Mark, played by Tom McBride. He doesn't go to town with others because he doesn't want to spoil their good time. And Vicky, played by Lauren Marie Taylor, has a crush on Mark, so she wants to stay by his side. While the others are away, Jason wipes out all of these people. A notable counselor who doesn't get killed is the wisecracking Ted, played by Stu Charno. Ted survives this movie by staying in town and drinking all night.
Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs.
And of course, any slasher movie needs a heroine. The final girl, replacing Alice in that role, is Ginny Field, who is named in tribute to Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2 production designer Virginia Field, a counselor who's in a relationship with Paul. Ginny is studying child psychology, which turns out to be helpful when she and Paul return to Packanack to find that the legendary Jason Voorhees has killed everybody there. Played by Amy Steele, Ginny is one of the most popular heroines in this series because fans admire her intelligence and the fact that she is able to gain some insight into how Jason's mind works.
Well, what would he be like today? Some kind of out-of-control psychopath? A child trapped in a man's body?
Steele's performance was so well received, the filmmakers wanted her to come back for Friday the 13th Part 3, but she wanted to make what she considered more important movies, which didn't include slasher sequels, and wanted more money than the producers were willing to offer. So she decided not to reprise her role of Ginny, a decision she would come to regret later on.
That was great. It was fun. You know, maybe I should have kept going Part 3, 4, 5, 6, but it was good.
Steele has since largely stepped away from acting and become a therapist in real life.
It's more fun using that child psychology on you. You're such a sucker, Lauren.
We have to address the fact that Jason, a dead little boy in the first movie, is now a grown man, alive and homicidal. Mrs. Voorhees was trying to avenge his death, and now he's killing people to avenge her death. How does this make sense? Well, the movie doesn't try to give any direct answers, which is for the best. The history of Jason and his mother is told as a creepy campfire story by Paul. He tells us that Jason's body was never recovered from the lake, and that some believe he didn't die, that he has been surviving on his own in the wilderness. We are shown that Jason has put together his own shack in the woods, where the centerpiece is a shrine to his mother's head. Miner believed that Jason survived the drowning incident, and that the child Alice was grabbed by at the end of the first movie wasn't the real Jason. It was a figment of her imagination.
The boy, Jason.
Ma'am, we didn't find any boy.
But there is no one in Part 2 to confirm whether Jason survived and his mother didn't know it, or if he rose from the grave after his mother was killed. It's open to interpretation. Fans can come up with their own theories, like Ginny does. After hearing the campfire story, Ginny begins wondering what Jason would be like if he really exists. She feels sympathy for him. His mother was the only person he knew, his only friend. She understands why he would feel driven to kill for her, and that's how she is able to beat Jason in the end.
Jason, Mother is talking to you!
Jason has the look of someone who has been living off the wilderness in this film. He doesn't have his iconic hockey mask yet. He doesn't get that until Part 3. Here, he wears a sack over his head, with a hole cut in it for his one good eye to peer out of. Some have said that this was inspired by the look of the killer in the 1976 film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And it is quite similar. Friday the 13th Part 2 was already in production by the time David Lynch's movie The Elephant Man was released in October of 1980. And that film also features a disfigured character who wears a bag over his head, with one hole cut in it so he can see. When Miner saw this, he said it was an unfortunate coincidence that Jason looked like the Elephant Man. That's probably why he ditches the sack in the next movie. Various crew members put on the Jason costume throughout the film, like Ellen Lutter did for that shot of his legs. Miner initially offered the role to Tasso Stavrakis, an actor and stuntman who had also been Savini's assistant in the effects department on the first Friday, but he turned it down. So the role ended up going to Warrington Gillette, an actor who had stunt training and first got involved with the project when he thought he had a shot at playing Paul.
So they said, would you like to be Jason? So I said, hey, listen, I'm happy to do anything you want me to do.
Instead, he found himself buried under prosthetics that took 6 hours to apply so he could play the silent role of Jason. Gillette understandably hated wearing that makeup.
New mouth, new this, new that. They closed this eye off, which is very painful if you close an eye off for like 12 hours at a time.
And he and Steele both hated filming the scene where an unmasked Jason lunges at Ginny through a window, a scene that had to be shot multiple times before they got it right.
I was angry and I wanted to kill somebody.
He said we have to do that scene again. I thought, oh my God.
It was horrific.
So Gillette was eventually replaced by stuntman Steve Daskowitz, who also went by the name Steve Dash. He wore the sack mask to pursue Ginny throughout the climactic chase scene, a sequence that's packed with scares, stunts, and even a little bit of urine. The producers wanted a character to urinate in fear during the movie, and that person ended up being Ginny. She hides from Jason under a bed, and while the killer searches for her, a rat comes, walking up to her face. The urine flows, giving away her hiding spot. Dash got very banged up filming Jason's confrontation with Ginny and had to make some trips to the hospital. During the filming of one scene, he broke some of his ribs by falling on Jason's pickaxe, and later he had to get stitches in a finger when Steele accidentally sliced him with a machete. The chase sequence ends in Jason's shack, where Ginny figures out she'd be able to trick Jason by putting on the sweater Mrs. Voorhees was wearing when she was killed. A sweater that happens to be there by her severed head. When Jason sees Ginny in his mom's clothes, he has visions of her talking to him. Betsy Palmer reprising the role of Mrs. Voorhees in a cameo. Palmer's cameo was filmed by Steve Miner's old friend, Wes Craven. Since Gillette is credited as Jason Voorhees, and Daskowitz is credited as Jason's stunt double, it took decades for Dash to get the proper recognition for his contributions to Friday the 13th Part 2. But fans eventually became aware of just how much work he did on the film, and he was able to interact with them at conventions for many years before he passed away in 2018. The Jason of Part 2 is different than the hockey mask version of the character. He's smaller and clumsier, but Dash did a great job of playing this bloodthirsty woodsman, Jason. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't feature much of the blood that Jason spills. The ratings board had received a huge amount of backlash for letting the first Friday the 13th get by with an R rating after just a few seconds had been trimmed from the kill scenes, so they were much tougher on the sequels. Miner had to submit Part 2 to the ratings board nearly 10 times, whittling 54 seconds out of the death scenes along the way, before the sequel got its R rating. Every single on-screen kill had to be cut down to some degree. The effects work that was supposed to earn Carl Fullerton the reputation of being on the level of Tom Savini wasn't seen by the audience. And for almost 40 years, the uncut gore footage was believed to be lost forever. It wasn't until Scream Factory was gathering material for the Friday the 13th franchise box set they released in 2020 that it was discovered Fullerton still had a VHS copy of the kills he and his crew created for the film. Thanks to Scream Factory, fans have finally had the chance to see Friday the 13th Part 2 death scenes in all their gory glory. Over the years, some genre fans have noticed that a few of the kills in the first two Friday the 13th movies are oddly similar to kills in the 1971 Italian film A Bay of Blood, which was directed by Mario Bava and is also known as Twitch of the Death Nerve. In particular, scenes of people with axes or machetes stuck in their faces and the double impalement of Jeff and Sandra look like they could have been lifted right out of Bava's movie. Sean S. Cunningham has said that any similarities between the films is purely coincidental, as he didn't see A Bay of Blood until years after the Friday movies were released. But others involved with these movies were definitely aware of Bava's film before the first two Fridays went into production. Martin Kitrosser, who worked as script supervisor on the first two movies and co-wrote the screenplays for parts 3 and 5, is such a huge fan of Bava's work that he even named his son Mario Bava Kitrosser. When Kurtz was hired to write Friday the 13th Part 2, he and Katrasser felt they should model the kills after the ones in A Bay of Blood, and Katrasser even thought the movie should include a dedication to Bava, who had passed away the month before Friday the 13th was released, in the end credits. That suggestion was shot down by the producers, so there's no denying that multiple people involved with the early Fridays knew they were following in the footsteps of Bava's film. Friday the 13th Part 2 didn't deliver the amount of bloodshed that had been seen in either A Bay of Blood or Friday the 13th, but it was a success when it reached theaters on April 30th, 1981, 9 days short of the first film's one-year anniversary.
The day you count on for terror is not over.
Made on a budget of just over $1 million, Friday the 13th Part 2 earned almost $22 million at the box office. This was substantially less than the first movie's take, but still a good return on investment. It did have a bigger opening weekend than its predecessor had, then had a steeper drop-off. Exactly why it didn't do as well as the first movie isn't quite clear. Were fans disappointed that the kills had been watered down? Was it because the market was flooded with slasher movies in 1981? There were a lot of them released that year, but Friday the 13th Part 2 is one of the best. Whether or not Miner was successful in his endeavor to make Part 2 better than the first movie is up to individual fans to decide. Just like it's up to us to come up with our own answers as to what really happened to Paul and Muffin. Miner certainly made a worthy follow-up and was able to turn Jason Voorhees, that dead little boy, into a believable, threatening slasher. The film takes the viewer on a creepy, fun, fast-paced ride, introducing us to likable characters and then knocking them off in entertainingly shocking ways. It's a thrilling and important chapter in the legend of Jason Voorhees, and when Miner came back to direct Friday the 13th Part 3, he took the character a step beyond and turned him into the hockey mask-wearing icon we know and love.
Right now at Domino's, you can carry out any large one-topping pizza when you order online.
Don't worry, I do this all the time.
It's late summer in 1982, and you've seen the preview for Friday the 13th Part 3, which told you a few things. The very first piece of information that the preview had in store for you was that this was very much Jason's movie.
Because these are Jason's woods.
While Child's Play would fully embrace the name change and just start using Chucky in the title, Friday the 13th would hang on to that particular superstitious day for a bit longer. Jason is named almost as much as the fact that this sequel in the Friday the 13th franchise would be in 3D, which is to say a lot. The preview also shows another detail that at the time would be innocuous, but looking back was the catalyst for what many people would see as the key to the series. This is the first movie where Jason gets his iconic hockey mask. Put on your trusty red and blue glasses as we push this film right into your lap and find out what happened to
Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D.
Friday the 13th Part 1 and 2 were incredibly popular, raking in $59 million and $29 million off of their rather small budgets in 1980 and 1981 respectively. While the critical reception wasn't great, that didn't stop the public from coming out in droves, which meant that there was a guarantee we would see more from this franchise. Paramount owned the rights at the time and decided to add a wrinkle to the production with the addition of 3D. This was part of a boom in the early 80s of 3D productions that also included Amityville 3D, Jaws 3D, Silent Madness, and a whole slew of others. The reason that Paramount and the Friday the 13th team chose it was because of a movie called Comin' At Ya, and it made a lot more money than it should have, presumably based on the fact that it was released in 3D. With Paramount's stature and ability to fund, they went big on it. Friday the 13th Part 3 would be the first 3D movie released by Paramount since the 50s, and would end up being the first wide release of a 3D movie by a major studio. It would show up in over 1,000 theaters nationwide, and be the first production to ever use the Marx 3D system. And while the budget says it was just above $2 million, Paramount paid anywhere from $8 to $10 million just to install the proper equipment in movie theaters, just so they could smoothly run the film, including training for the projectionists and a sort of war room-like number for them to call for troubleshooting. With that much effort and money put into the production of the flick, They were going to get their money's worth. The poster has a 3D looking effect, and multiple scenes were filmed just to get extra 3D involved, including one that was only shown in the theatrical run. A few of the actors even recalled years later that they were told to focus more on little things that they could do that would look good in 3D, even above their own acting. Things like yo-yos and a number of objects being hurled at the screen, and of course the infamous eyeball pop, were all designed to make the audience feel engaged. Some of the scenes ended up being very complicated and needed to be shot multiple times, like the car window being broken, a process that proved to be very expensive and time-consuming. In addition to this, they had to shoot the movie far brighter than they normally would, and even had to take into consideration what colors would be used on screen. To helm a very much more ambitious project, Steve Miner was brought back into the fold as director after his success with Part 2. Miner, an Emmy-nominated television director as well, has quite the horror resume with credits after Friday the 13th Part 3, including House, another collaboration with Friday the 13th creator Sean S. Cunningham, Warlock, Halloween H2O, and Lake Placid. The original idea of the movie was to have the final girl from Part 2, Ginny, played by Amy Steele, come back and be put into a mental hospital after the events of Part 2. Jason would track her down and kill all of the hospital staff and patients while setting up a final showdown between the two. While that sounds a bit derivative of slasher contemporary Michael Myers in Halloween 2, it was all for naught as Steele was unable or unwilling to come back to the fold.
$0 Grubhub delivery fees with Prime. Eligible orders only. Terms and additional fees apply.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our Joe Blow channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
This changed the approach, and Ron Kurz, who wrote the previous movie, was offered the chance to write a script for the third feature, but he too declined to be involved. The first draft of the final script was written by the husband and wife team of Martin Kitrosser and Carol Watson. Watson wouldn't have much more on her resume after this, but Martin would go on to write Friday the 13th Part 5 and be the script supervisor for nearly all of Quentin Tarantino's movies. While a lot of that script was used in the final movie, Paramount also brought in Petru Popescu to help as they felt the movie wasn't mean enough. With the 80s slasher boom at its peak in the first third of the decade, you needed your slasher movie to really stand out, and this was already an established series on top of that. While it is said that Popescu added a significant amount to the final movie, he remained uncredited when all was said and done. The actors were chosen almost completely based on their looks rather than their acting ability, or how well they were known at the time. Dana Kimmel, Tracy Savage, Paul Kraka, Catherine Parks, and David Cadams were all among the main cast who would get terrorized by Jason. Larry Zerner, who plays Shelley, was found after handing out flyers. Then when it comes to playing Jason, we would get a third straight movie with a third different actor in the role. Well, fourth if you count the two from Part 2. British stuntman Richard Brooker would get the call several films before the role was cemented in the minds of many by Kane Hodder. At 6'3", he was certainly a tall enough Jason, but was very trim, and ended up having to wear a lot of padding to seem as bulky as the character was needed. He did all of his own stunts for the movie, and was lucky enough to be forever tied to the now famous hockey mask that the killer wears throughout the series. The mask was a very fluky occurrence that may not have happened if the movie wasn't being shot in 3D. The 3D effects supervisor, Martin Sadoff, was a massive hockey fan, specifically of the Detroit Red Wings, and he kept various hockey equipment with him at all times. During a lighting break, he happened to pull out a goalie mask that director Miner loved. When they shot the scenes with it, however, it appeared too small on Brooker's face, so they tweaked it to fit his face better. In addition to resizing the mask, the red triangles and extra hole punches were added to make it stand out. The mask itself was accompanied by different prosthetic masks that went under it and took several hours to apply each day. While the actors, including who played Jason, were new, one thing that stayed the same was series composer Harry Manfredini. His now iconic scores for the series have been played all over and parodied while also being released on vinyl as standalone or collections over the years. One thing that they did change was the opening credits scene. While it had been upbeat and jazzy in the past, it was a full-blown disco theme for the third movie, and it's fantastic. Manfredini partnered with Michael Zager for the tune, and he would go on to say that it was quite popular at the time, in both discos and gay bars. The opening song would become the stuff of legends, but the rest of the movie has that trademark Friday the 13th score, with all the cues that fans have grown to expect from the series after the first two movies. To that end, Part 3 marked the first of multiple occasions that the movie was shot under an alternative title, and more specifically under the name of a song from pop and rock legend David Bowie. Something that would happen again in the series. Filming on the movie changed from one side of the country to the other, where they went from Connecticut to California, where they would build nearly every building on the Balusit Movie Ranch. Part of the reason that we receive Richard Brooker as the new Jason is because Jason from Part 2, Steve Daskowitz, was offered the role, but was told that he would have to supply his own travel from his East Coast-based home to the new shooting location in California. He declined, and that is why Brooker was able to join the film and be the first man in the mask. The main reason for the move to California was to be closer to the burgeoning 3D technology that they were going to be using on the film. Something Paramount was sued for in the realm of $25 million by Marx Polarized Corporation. The movie, like many slasher films, would also need to be cut down in a lot of areas to avoid that dreaded X rating. While the script was changed to have a darker and more menacing feel, the gore, deaths, and some of the scenes from that script needed to be changed. One of the more famous instances of this is an alternate ending, where survivor Chris walks back to the house, only to have the door burst open and have Jason grab her hair and decapitate her. While this would later be revealed as a dream, it was deemed too dark and violent to include. This scene is also notable for using an alternative mask created by none other than Stan Winston. The mask remains in this scene and is not visible in other parts of the movie, with the entire design of the character getting an overhaul. The deaths of Andy, Vera, Edna, Chili, and Debbie all had to be cut down in varying degrees to appease the then MPAA from branding them with an unusable rating. Originally, it was going to be implied that Jason had sexually assaulted some of his victims, but several executives thought that this either went too far or that it would make Jason less marketable. Perhaps some foresight that this series still had a lot of legs to it. Friday the 13th Part 3 was released on Friday, August 13th, 1982, and raked in almost $10 million in its opening weekend. That number is significant because while it was only number 21 for the year in terms of box office numbers, it surpassed the first movie in terms of opening weekend numbers. In addition, as recently as 2020, it's the fourth highest grossing movie in the franchise. And with inflation, it's one of the highest grossing slasher films of all time. Its nearly $37 million take at the box office is impressive, but the critical reception was cold. While reviewers at the time didn't think much of it, it is usually near the top of fans' rankings for the series, and continues to be a crowd pleaser for over 40 years. Now you can say you don't need 3D glasses just to see what happened to Friday the 13th Part 3. Though there could be an argument for a chunk of the Paramount entries, it's wild to think that the fourth movie in a slasher franchise would be considered the series' high. Add on to that this was advertised as the final chapter in what was thought to be a dying subgenre, and we ended up getting one of the best damn horror movies of the 1980s. And of course, in the Friday the 13th franchise. Let's lay it all out. Corey Feldman, who was on his way to becoming an 80s staple, debuted as Tommy Jarvis, who would become the series' main protagonist. Tom Savini, the original makeup artist from the OG, was brought back, and we got one of the best iterations of Jason Voorhees, courtesy of icon Ted White. So let's dance like no one's watching. No dead fucks allowed. Sorry, not my words. And once again, head back to Camp Crystal Lake as we explore the making of a classic slasher and ask what happened to Friday the 13th, the final chapter.
What? It says you're a dead fuck. What? A dead fuck?
For every trend that feels like the sky's the limit, we always have the sobering reality that this life is constantly changing. And what's cool now quickly becomes irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Slashers didn't quite have the same epic length in their golden era as others, but like that of a beautiful star full of blood, boobs, and mayhem, they burned twice as bright for half as long. The subgenre was already waning by the time Friday the 13th Part 3D was released, and the mood over at Paramount was shifting. Though it was a success, producer Frank Mancuso Jr. felt that the violent slasher resentment from family groups and significant publications was becoming an issue, and decided that the fourth Friday the 13th would be the last. How does one walk away on such a high note? Well, the thought was that you could kill your horror franchise before it gets stale. Hence the final chapter moniker. It should be said that there's no guarantee this would have been the last entry, and that producer Frank Mancuso Jr. was more the one who wanted to move on and expand his reach within the company. But everyone involved believed, at least at the time, that this would be the final nail in the proverbial coffin of Jason Voorhees. After directing duties on parts 2 and 3, Steve Miner politely declined to return for the final chapter, saying, "The success of that series is based on remaking the same film over and over again. As a filmmaker, I wanted to go on to something different." Enter Joseph Zito. After his little special effects heavy slasher flick, The Prowler, caught the attention of Paramount, Mancuso took a meeting and a liking to Mr. Zito, trusting that he understood what types of movies they were trying to make. With a director on board, what would make the final chapter unique? How does one go out with a bang 4 movies in? Even if there were noticeable differences story-wise, each entry was essentially the same thing, with the same vibe. But as Joseph Zito put it, he pitched a smarter movie that would focus more on the characters alongside the ultimate set from hell ideas. Shooting mostly at night? You got it. Putting a middle schooler as the main protagonist along with his family and the main characters? Absolutely. Add in an adorable golden retriever since animals are always easy on set? You're goddamn right. Put some of the most important scenes in the rain while shooting in the middle of winter? Easy peasy. Now it was time to put pen to paper, and according to Zito, Paramount wanted a single vision idea for their last hurrah with Jason Voorhees. But the only problem was that Zito wasn't a writer and never claimed to be one. However, he knew of one with whom he could hash out an outline, one that he was working with on a script before he was hired on to the final chapter. Bruce Hidemi Seiko came aboard and helped work out the general idea for Part 4, while Barney Cohen was brought in to help write the actual screenplay. Bruce sketched out the general story and deaths, and Cohen brought in the family angle and helped strengthen the characters. We don't get great interactions from the likes of Ted and Jimmy without the heart of Cohen's writing. They both agreed that nothing would be worth a damn if we didn't care about the fate of the screen cast. It may sound ridiculous now, but killing for the sake of it only goes so far. We needed to give a damn about the teens if the final chapter had any chance of actually feeling, well, you know, final. Casting-wise, they knew they needed more than your cookie-cutter teens, so the idea was to aim for a tad bit of recognition, something a bit more trendy than what was used before. So we got a few semi-recognizable faces in the crowd for the first time. Pretty boy Peter Barton, famous for the 80s TV series Powers of Matthew Starr, was cast as Doug. Lawrence Monason of The Last American Virgin played Ted, and of course, there are the Doublemint twins. You just had to be there. As Tina and Terry. Now, we can't leave out Crispin Glover. Though his dad Bruce was quite well known at the time, the Glover family's eccentricities were not a one-off. Very clearly passed down to his son, Crispin's Jimmy character was strange yet sincerely charming, the kind of casting that would stand the test of time. There's a reason he was then, and still is, a fan favorite. You can't just wing sick dance moves like this and not be one of the greatest. But one significant change, and a quite ballsy one at the time, was to cast a kid as the protagonist, and his family as the heroes. Enter Miss Jarvis, Trish, and of course Tommy, played by Corey Feldman. Soon to be a household name, as this and Gremlins would release only a few months apart, Zito immediately saw the young Feldman's charm, relatability, and passion in his craft. But there was a lingering doubt. A concern, if you will. Would Feldman be able to lift and swing the machete? Could he make the defining scene, the death of Jason, believable? You're goddamn right he did. We got our first introduction to what would be a recurring character in the Friday the 13th franchise with Tommy Jarvis, and it all started with Mr. Corey Feldman. But it was Ted White's casting as Jason Voorhees that tied this proverbial rug together. A longtime stuntman who doubled for legends like Clark Gable and John Wayne, White brought a visceral intensity to the role, not really seen prior. Zito wanted a slightly more intelligent Jason, who would think a bit more and plan out his attacks. White's intense and menacing physical presence perfectly captures the embodiment of what we think of as Jason Voorhees. And it all started here with Friday the 13th, the final chapter. For all of the hoopla, and yes, I'm bringing that word back, about how Jason should never run, Ted White and his cowboy attitude clearly shows that you are wrong. Starting with the first day of shooting on October 31st, 1983, how apropos, the final chapter would be a grueling, freezing, and physically demanding shoot for all involved. Joseph Zito was known as somewhat of a perfectionist, which led to some tense moments on set. These were run-and-gun shoots that, at best, were stressful, and at worst, well, let's just say Mr. White and Mr. Zito had more than a few arguments, with White saying, "Joe Zito and I, we started off pretty good for the first 6 of 7 days, but after that, he became kinda a bully." Judy Aronson's death as Samantha was difficult to shoot, and led to an unpleasant confrontation between the two. The raft kill was shot in an actual lake. The final chapter was a low-budget movie, so there's no surprise that a water tank wasn't used. But this was in the middle of a Southern California winter, and wouldn't you know it, the water was bone-chillingly cold. Though her lower half was in a wetsuit, for the effects to look real, her top half needed to be exposed, and required to be in the lake for hours. Judy had said that it nearly broke her, and all the time spent freezing in an awkward position brought her to tears. Now add on to that a case of hypothermia, and this pissed off Ted White. He had had enough and called for her to be pulled out. And Zito allegedly responded, "Why don't you do Jason and I'll do the directing?" This caused White to threaten to leave if Judy wasn't taken out of the freezing water. This led to more than a few occasions of Ted telling Zito to rightfully kiss my ass.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's Corkscrew?
Looking to get all of your holiday shopping done at one place this year? Check out Kohl's for all the best toys and gifts at prices you'll love that'll make your loved ones smile all year long. Make holiday shopping easy on yourself this year and shop at Kohl's for all the best finds.
A Friday kill is only as good as the effects artist behind it. And who would be the one to put Jason out of his misery once and for all? Tom fucking Savini, who was Kid Jason's inventor and had previously worked with Zito on the effects-heavy movie The Prowler. Savini bookending his creation just feels right, and ended up being the better decision for the franchise overall. Whether it's Doug's head being crushed against the shower wall, Tina's fantastic car stunt, Glover's double corkscrew meat cleaver demise, or Paul's spear to the crotch. You know, as you would, holding your own crotch. There's just something magical about a Friday the 13th death, and the final chapter does not disappoint. Now, teens dying is par for the course, but since this whole movie would be advertised as The Final Friday, how would they ultimately do away with Jason? How would Mr. Voorhees perish once and for all? Ironically, Tom Savini wasn't a fan of the machete head split, even if it's one of the most iconic deaths in the series, courtesy of his immense talent. But he actually pitched a far more gruesome ending. This would change some characteristics and set up Tommy as not only an effects lover, but one who is also into science. He'd take a microwave apart and tweak the power settings with a voltage controller. As a kid, he'd likely show this off by melting his plastic toy soldiers early in the movie. He would end up jamming this device onto Jason's head, giving us an epic brain melt and head explosion. Though Savini's idea would fit into the budget, the financial wing of the studio thought that it was too far off from the Friday the 13th formula. One of Savini's assistants, John Volich, happened to be messing around with a machete that had previously been used in a zombie's head from Dawn of the Dead, and in an off-the-cuff remark, mentioned that maybe they should use the machete to kill Jason. After all, it is his weapon. The machete idea was pitched to producers, and the rest, they say, is history. However, it should be mentioned that poor Corey Feldman had to do so many days with the bald cap that he actually got the flu. So when you watch the final scene in the movie, it's impressive to know Feldman filmed it sick as a dog. But we should all be able to admit, even if it's a low-key death, the head sliding down the blade, followed by Feldman's Jarvis going batshit crazy, does feel somewhat epic. There's a rawness to it, and it fits perfectly in closing out the series, maybe not in scope, but certainly in emotion. On Friday, April 13th, 1984, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, grossed $11.2 million in its opening weekend, setting a record for the series and Paramount Pictures. The reception from fans was ecstatic, grossing right under Part 3D with $32.9 million, and becoming the second most successful entry. And what of its legacy? Well, it's become a fan favorite and considered the best, if not the top 2 in the entire series. And it's not hard to see why. Ask any Friday lover if it's beloved, and you get a resounding fucking A right it is. We have a charming cast with excellent chemistry, great kills, and a fantastic portrayal of Jason Voorhees. We cared enough to laugh and scream, and in the end, cheered on Tommy to go to town with Jason's machete, to look back on Part 4 with a grueling shoot, set drama, and the foolish attempt to kill a series prematurely. The fact that this is even enjoyed is a triumph. But to come out as an agreed upon high mark for the Friday the 13th franchise is a damn near miracle. We were lucky to get something this fun, violent, and cool. And we are damn happy it's grown a following with the new generation. Jason will never die, and will continue to live on as passed down by generations. Whether on Blu-ray with friends, a marathon on Shudder, or at a midnight showing, the final chapter did prove one thing. Jason Voorhees was here to stay. After Friday the 13th, the final chapter, the series was in an awkward place. With Jason Voorhees being killed in the finale and his evil being seemingly passed onto the young Tommy Jarvis, fans wondered what direction the series would take, if any, because it wasn't a foregone conclusion that they'd even make another one. This was a different era, but we know better than that. With Feldman unable to return, they scrapped the evil Tommy, recast Corey Feldman, and therefore made us miss out on some sweet guitar solos. Expectations truly needed to be thrown out the window for where the story would go, and I doubt many people would have their bets on an imposter Jason. So let's get into the MPAA cuts, a cast member named Voorhees, and a whole lot of cocaine as we find out what happened to Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning.
You went out in the sun too long. Jason Voorhees is dead. His body was cremated. He's nothing but a handful of ash.
The final chapter was intended to be the death of the franchise, but after that film raked in tons of dough, Paramount was unable to let their low-budget cash cow gracefully bow out. With Jason's death, the Friday the 13th team set out to make something completely new, post-Jason. They felt that the prior films had pretty much followed the same blueprint, so they were hoping to subvert that. Pretty ironic given what the film ended up becoming, but we'll touch on that in a bit. This entry would also see Frank Mancuso Jr. take a step back from an on-set producer to a role less involved as an executive producer. He hated that his name was being associated with these films and wanted to move on to bigger and better. as he worked as a middleman between the production and Paramount. I mean, his father was the head of Paramount after all. So the man in the wings, Phil Scuderi, who often goes uncredited, actually helped shape Part 5 into what we'd know it to be. He hired director Danny Steinman, wanting something far from Hollywood sensibilities, and a brand new script that refused to bring back the Jason character. Ballsy decision to say the least, given that most of Steinman's experience came from the world of softcore porn. After seeing his work on Savage Streets, the producers asked director Danny Steinman to keep his schedule open as they wanted him for Part 5. It was Steinman's idea to focus primarily on Tommy as he hallucinates, and is constantly fighting any violent tendencies. Despite the use of the hockey mask and machete, Steinman wanted the audience to question whether it was even Jason doing the killings. But not everyone was happy with Danny's directing style. This caused massive friction between he and Mancuso Jr., who felt that he was out of his element. The script would be worked out by Martin Kitrosser and David Cohen, with Steinman doing massive rewrites. And according to many cast members, the script was never fully finished while filming. Much of the dialogue was scrapped on the day, and they'd come up with something on the spot. The story of Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, follows Tommy Jarvis as he heads to a house for troubled teens. He's trying to get over the events of the final chapter and is overly quiet. When one of the residents is brutally murdered with an axe, a series of grisly murders start occurring at the house. Is it Tommy, or has Jason truly returned from the grave? And one thing that few people seem to bring up is that this also introduced a very different element to the series. We were following a male lead. All the films in the past, our final girl was, of course, a girl, fighting against all odds and vanquishing the Voorhees on their heels. Yet Tommy Jarvis would take center stage here, being essentially our final boy. Corey Feldman made Tommy Jarvis a memorable character from his appearance in the final chapter. This little ball of energy and special effects masks was the perfect surrogate for so many young viewers watching. And with the end of Part 4 setting up Tommy as a bad guy, there was a lot of intrigue. But then stepped the filmmaker who ruined everything, Steven Spielberg. See, Spielberg was producing this little film called The Goonies, which Feldman was signed on to, and therefore was unable to film Friday the 13th Part 5, much to the chagrin of Corey Feldman. And Corey's schedule was nearly impossible for the filmmakers to contend with, so they brought a crew to Feldman's backyard to film a brief dream sequence that would see Jason return to kill two men before setting his sights on Jarvis. The crew was only at Feldman's residence for a couple of hours, setting up a rain machine and getting reaction shots of the boy. The shots of Tommy walking through the woods are actually of a smaller woman. John Shepherd was cast as the much more grown-up Tommy Jarvis, a role that would require him to be quite stoic and sweaty. He's still making scary masks, but he doesn't really feature any of the characteristics that the character had in 4. The events have clearly traumatized him to no end. Shepherd was actually disappointed when he initially found out that he'd gotten the lead in a Friday the 13th film, and not some movie called Repetition. He never wanted to be in a horror film as he was deeply religious, but a friend convinced him to take the part, insisting that he was the good in all of this evil. Shepherd claims to have played him as a Boo Radley type. Young Shavar Ross had been working the television circuit, appearing on Different Strokes when he got the role of Reggie the Reckless. Though, in order to take the part, his parents had all of the curse words excised from Reggie's dialogue. Actress Melanie Kinnaman didn't want to be one of those damsels in horror movies, so she did a bit of film study before getting the role of Pam, using Jamie Lee Curtis as a prototype. The rest of the cast is filled with unknown actors from the time, though several stuck around the horror genre, and we have to mention Deborah Voorhees, who got the part due to her name and, assets. Her part had actually already been cast with actress Darcy DeMoss, but Steinman was adamant that he wanted Voorhees. DeMoss was still paid for the part and would eventually appear in Jason Lives.
Oh, some damn enchiladas!
As one of the standout characters of the film, Demon, Miguel Nunez Jr. knew that he had to impress. He came up with Demon's whole look and even wrote the song that he sings.
Ooh, baby, ooh, baby.
Much of his role is ad-libbed, with Nunez's natural charisma beaming through. The final chapter's Ted White